Chapter 638. However, she was not the only one who had latched onto the Jun family. The true master of the Dugu family, Dugu Zongheng, had also latched onto the Jun family. It was fine if Dugu Xiaoyi did not leave, but he, the dignified head of the Dugu family, did not return home to take charge of the overall situation, but instead stayed at the Jun family's residence. However, Dugu Zongheng argued, "I won't go home even if you beat me to death. All the younger ones at home come home during the new year, and the 3 sons and 7 grandsons are like a litter of pigs. Other than being angry, there is nothing else to do at home. Dugu Zongheng is enough." This matter was immediately confirmed. When Dugu Zongheng came to invite Dugu Zongheng home, his nose was bruised and his face was swollen. Dugu Zongheng scolded him and beat him with a stick. It turned out that Dugu Zongheng's 2 younger brothers had returned home. Dugu Zongheng, who had suffered at the hands of Dugu Zongheng for a year, naturally wanted to complain and show off his authority as the eldest brother. Then, they discussed who would stay behind for the next year. At first, the 2 of them listened to their eldest brother's instructions with their heads bowed, but in the end, no one was willing to stay at home. Dugu Zongheng was naturally unhappy. "Damn it, you guys are hiding far away, happy to be idle. But what about me? Do I have to endure it alone? Do I have to be abused as the eldest brother?" So, he began to sternly reprimand them, trying to persuade them with emotion and reason. However, the 2 brothers were unmoved and could only shake their heads. Helpless, Dugu Zongheng flew into a rage out of humiliation and simply used force to threaten them. The 2 brothers did not want to be outdone. This was related to their lives for the next year. The 2 little ones had a tacit understanding and joined hands to beat up the older one. When the 3 brothers fought, the 7 younger ones outside, although they usually had a good relationship, naturally had to help their respective fathers. Therefore, they also began to argue for what was right. In the end, they also used their fists to do the talking. The 7 brothers directly fought into a ball. Only when the old mistress came out and gave them a good beating with her dragon-headed walking stick did they finally settle down. However, the old mistress was so tired that she was panting. More importantly, she was so angry that she sent someone to invite the old master back to take charge. The family looked left and right, looking as if they had just come out of a battlefield. The only one who could come out was the eldest brother, Dugu Zongheng. Besides, the Jun family was Dugu Zongheng's in-laws, so who else could come if not him? But when Dugu Zongheng came, Dugu Zongheng immediately became furious. "Look at the Jun family, and then look at my own son, who came with a bloody nose and a swollen face on the 29th day of the new year. Isn't this clearly undermining me?" Without saying a word, he picked up his cane, and from the looks of it, it seemed like he was going to break Dugu Zongheng's leg. Dugu Zongheng's old wounds had not yet healed, and now he had a new one. He stood in the house of his future son-in-law, and before he could even catch his breath, he had already fled. Even after he had left for a long time, Dugu Zongheng was still angry and was muttering to himself, "Family's misfortune, unfilial son, and so on." Dugu Xiaoyi comforted him softly and simply leaned on her grandfather, acting like a spoiled child to amuse him. After a long time, the old man's expression finally became better. Mu Shuetong was also present and was chatting with Jun Wui with a smile on his face. Mu Shuetong and Han Yinming looked as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders ever since Jun Moxie had made that world-shaking announcement. They were still somewhat concerned about the Blizzard Silver City, but they also knew that nothing would happen to the Blizzard Silver City from the moment Jun Moxie had made that announcement. After all, even if the Xiao family was stupid, they wouldn't rashly start an internal strife at such a critical juncture, which would greatly weaken the Blizzard Silver City strength. In fact, the Xiao family might even think of using the Han family as cannon fodder to exhaust the Jun family's strength as much as possible. However, when Han Yinming entered the hall, Jun Moxie, who had been hiding from her the entire time, took the initiative to greet her. His attitude was exceptionally warm. "Ah, isn't this Miss Han? I haven't seen you for a few days, and you've become more and more beautiful. TSK, TSK. I wonder when Miss Han will tie my little wife to my bed." I've been looking forward to it every day. I've been looking forward to it from the stars and the moon, and I've been looking forward to it ever since. So, you should hurry up and make it happen." Han Yinming's face turned red. She was so ashamed that she almost wanted to run away. There was no need to mention the regret in little Princess Han's heart. She really shouldn't have bet with this guy that day. This guy is too treacherous. He had already dug a trap for me to jump into. But I was so stupid that I thought that I had succeeded. And I had even jumped into the trap with a triumphant attitude. Then I found out that I had unknowingly lost myself to him and had become his little wife. And she had even taken an oath. And the most terrible thing was that she had taken an oath with the highest honor of the Blizzard Silver City. And she even had to tie herself up and send her to his bed. "This is really embarrassing." Little Princess Han Yinming was at a loss. Her lips were trembling, her head was lowered, and her face was red. She didn't dare to look at anyone, and didn't have the slightest trace of her usual arrogance and craftiness. As her future brother-in-law, Jun Wui felt a little distressed and hurriedly called out to her. The little girl sat down awkwardly. She lowered her head and sat for a while. After making sure that there was nothing wrong, she mustered up the courage to raise her head. Her pretty face was as red as a monkey's, but when she saw that Jun Moxie wasn't paying attention, she fiercely glared at Jun Moxie. Jun Moxie turned around and immediately shouted, "How can you be like this? The bet is already over, but you don't want to fulfill it. You're willing to bet, but you don't want to admit defeat. And you still dare to glare at me. Quick, 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 where's my little wife? I want her tonight. Hurry up and tie her up for me. Humph, don't forget your oath." I'm not glaring at you." The little girl's eyes were filled with tears, and she hurriedly tried to explain. "I don't care. In any case, I want my little wife tonight. You have to do it anyway. You promised me at the beginning." Jun Moxie smiled evilly. He looked at her with a proud expression and said, "Ah, it's so comfortable. I can consummate my marriage with my little wife tonight. It's really fascinating to think about it. No wonder everyone says, it doesn't matter if you're rich or not. Marry a wife and celebrate the new year. This is the truth. Consummating your marriage with your little wife on the eve of the New Year's Eve is a perfect example of double happiness." Han Yinming's eyes turned red, and she burst into tears. Her small mouth opened wide, and she cried in a heartbroken manner. Jun Wui and Mu Shuetong hastily tried to console her, but they knew the whole story. So they rebuked Jun Moxie. Jun Dashao spread out his hands with an innocent look on his face. "What little wife?" Dugu Xiaoyi suddenly became vigilant. She looked at Jun Moxie with her big bright eyes. "Brother Mo Xia, where did you get this little wife? How come I don't know who she is? I want to go and see." The little girl's face was full of murderous intent. Jun Moxie's scalp went numb. He had been trying to take advantage of her just now. How could he have forgotten about the situation in front of him? Then he turned around and saw that Guan Qinghan was also listening attentively. His mother, Dongfang Wenexan, was also very concerned and had come over. Heavens, I was only saying that. Young Master Jun felt as if he had lifted a rock and smashed it on his own feet. "What's going on?" Dongfang Wenexan sat down and asked his son with great interest, "Which family's girl is it? What did you get, little wife?" Actually, it's like this." Jun Moxie saw that Han Yinming was in Mu Shuetong's arms and didn't dare to raise her head. So he lowered his voice and explained. "It seems that these three women won't let me off if I don't explain things clearly today, huh?" Dugu Xiaoyi giggled and trembled. "You're saying that she pestered you to make a bet. Then she dug a pit for herself. She lost herself to you and became your little wife? Isn't this too creative?" Jun Moxie's face turned bitter. He helplessly spread out his hands. "That's the whole process. In fact, I felt very helpless. Who doesn't know that you're a cunning schemer?" Guan Qinghan snorted. Her tone was quite unkind. "Maybe you saw that the little girl was pretty, and your heart was already moved. So you used this as an excuse to set up a trap. I'm innocent. I'm innocent. I'm such a pure, upright, and noble gentleman. How could I do such a thing?" Jun Moxie's words made the entire hall burst into laughter. If this kid can be described as pure, upright, and noble gentleman, then everyone in the world is a saint. So, that's how it is. Dong Fong when Xian beamed with joy. You're my son. You're really good at picking up girls. Ha! But little Meng is too pitiful. She carelessly lost herself. Duga Xiaoyi came back to her senses. She pouted and said, she tied herself to the bed. I thought that I was stupid enough. But I didn't expect that this little girl is even more stupid than me. Today, I've learned something new. Everyone looked at her with a look that said, you finally know that you're stupid. Then, the hall roared with laughter. But this girl is the same age as Han Yinmeng. How dare she call Han Yinmeng a little girl? Amidst the laughter, Dong Fong, when Xian simply pulled Han Yinmeng in her arms and comforted her softly. Then, she suddenly said, actually, little Meng, when you send your concubine over, just tie her up lightly. Don't tie her up too hard, or it will hurt. She's my daughter-in-law. I'll feel sorry for her. Do you hear me? Don't be so careless. Han Yinmeng opened her eyes wide. She didn't expect Jun Moxie's mother to see this matter as well. She couldn't help but feel unhappy. She twisted her buttocks in Dong Fong when Xian's arms and said, I don't care. Sister-in-law, you're also bullying me. You have to stand up for me. Don't let your son bully the elders anymore. Why are you still calling me sister-in-law? Dong Fong when Xian frowned and pretended to be annoyed. You've already become my son's concubine. You can't call me sister-in-law anymore. Don't act like an elder anymore. Han Yinmeng became even more embarrassed. She rubbed her head in Dong Fong when Xian's arms and refused to raise her head. Jun Xie was also dumbfounded. What's wrong? Why does mom seem to take it seriously? I'm going to faint. How can it be like this? At this moment, Dugu Xiaoyi also hugged Dong Fong when Xian's shoulders and announced loudly, Annie, I'm your legitimate daughter-in-law. I've been waiting for so many years. You can't break us up. And Sister Qing Han, she's the real deal. What's done is done. The others have to wait. Everyone was sweating profusely. This little girl's valiance really made people gasp in amazement. Chapter 639. Dong Fong when Xian laughed heartily and pulled Guan Qing Han into his arms. With a face full of smiles, he said, It's all the same, all the same. Ha ha, this time, I can only wait to hold my grandson, huh? In Jun Moxie's small courtyard, Yi Gahan sat alone on a stone bench, humming an unknown, sad song. His expression was deep and lonely, but his eyes were burning with passion as he looked at the stone table in front of him. There were words written on it. At the moment of family reunion, Yi Gahan sat alone, using a knife in his left hand to carve a name on the stone table in front of him. Xiao Xiao, Xiao Xiao, Xiao Xiao. The fragrance of wine filled the air from all directions. Yi Gahan smiled miserably, threw away the knife, grabbed the jar of wine at his feet, raised it, and poured it into his mouth. His Adam's apple moved up and down as he swallowed, but his eyes were still fixed on the name on the stone table. Finally, the wine was finished, and he was drunk. Yi Gahan gently pressed his cheek against the stone table. He pressed his cheek against the ice-cold handwriting and silently roared, Xiao Xiao. A stream of tears flowed out silently, dripping onto the stone table, right where the name Xiao Xiao was carved, slowly condensing into a piece of ice in comparison. Although the Jun family was the one who made the announcement, they were also the one who completely stirred up the world. It could be said that they were the initiators. A single announcement from Jun Moxie had instantly thrown the world into chaos, making the already complicated world even more chaotic. But the Jun family, the initiator of all this, was probably the most relaxed one. At least, the other families were in a state of unease. In the imperial palace, His Majesty, the Emperor, was facing a table of extremely luxurious food and wine. His brows were tightly knitted, and he did not even have the mood to lift his chopsticks to try the food. The rise of the Jun family was unstoppable. In fact, it was progressing at a rapid pace. Back in Tianxiang City, they were just an ordinary aristocratic family. So what if they had the reputation of one family for military gods, 3 generations, and 6 marshals? They were just officials. It was just an empty title. But now, they actually dare to say in front of the entire world, "Those who follow me will prosper, and those who oppose me will perish." This was undoubtedly the most naked provocation to the imperial family. If he didn't have enough confidence, how would he dare to make such an unbridled threat to the entire world? The Emperor of Tianxiang didn't want to admit it, but he had no choice but to admit that the Jun family wasn't something that the emperor could control anymore. In fact, the current imperial power had to rely on the Jun family. Last time, the second prince had been scared to the point of incontinence at the gates of Tianxiang City. Jun Moxie hadn't done anything to hide it, and had directly led the two troublemakers back to the Jun family. Afterwards, he hadn't even given an explanation, as if nothing had happened. His Royal Highness was injured by a guest of the Jun family, but the Jun family didn't even give an explanation. It was as if such a thing had never happened before, and it went against the rules of the emperor and his subjects. But the imperial family actually just let it go, and let it go, just like that. In fact, even if the imperial family didn't want to let it go and wanted to pursue the matter, what could they do? Even if they forcefully pursued the matter, the result would only be worse. Who in the world didn't know that the Jun family's third young master, Jun Moxie, wasn't a reasonable person? He dared to kill a living person in broad daylight. Who didn't know that the Jun family's strength had reached an unimaginable level? Even the great masters and those above the great master level had to come and go alive. Today, the Jun family was second to none in the world. Even if they faced the formidable strength of the three holy lands, they could still force them to return in defeat, let alone others. So what if it was the imperial power? The imperial power, which was supreme in the eyes of ordinary people, was no longer in the eyes of the Jun family. Thinking of this, the emperor closed his eyes sadly, raised his neck, and gulped down a full cup of wine, choking and coughing. This originally sweet wine was so bitter when it entered his mouth, and it was difficult to swallow. Originally, any country would be happy and fortunate to have a super family like the Jun family emerge in it, because with such a colossus overseeing it, they could intimidate everyone for at least a few hundred years. Although such a family wouldn't directly participate in invasions, they wouldn't allow enemies to invade their country. Such a family was a powerful protective talisman for a country. But now, for the Emperor of Tianxiang, this protective talisman had become a fatal poison. It was the most lethal and life-threatening poison. Jun Wuhuya, isn't this all for you? A face appeared in front of the emperor's eyes, dignified with wisdom and calm yet sharp eyes. There was generosity and benevolence in his decisiveness to kill, and there was indifference and confidence in his disdain. The god of war, Jun Wuhui, the general in white. Do I regret it? Do I regret it? If I didn't make that decision back then, wouldn't the Jun family be my greatest help now? His Majesty shook his head bitterly. I don't regret it, yes, I don't regret it. I would still choose to do the same thing if I could do it all over again. Because I am the emperor, I will never allow such a thing to happen. Since the emperor has no regrets, I also have no regrets. It's just that fate makes fools of people. Winner takes all. This is nothing more than that. His Majesty swallowed that mouthful of wine with difficulty, as if he had drunk all the flavors of life. I don't regret it. It's useless to regret it. Jun Moxie, I want to see how long you can endure. Thinking of Jun Mo Xie, His Majesty, the Emperor, thought of the last effort he had put in. That day, after the banquet where Jun Wui had adopted Guan Qing Han as his daughter, the Emperor had a long talk with Jun Zhantian. Recalling that long talk, the Emperor's lips curled into a bitter smile. Brother Jun, you and I haven't had such a good drink for a few years. It seems that your tolerance for alcohol hasn't decreased at all. In fact, it's even better than before. His Majesty still used the title they used when they were conquering the world together, but it seemed like he hadn't used it for a long time. Your Majesty is too kind. This old man is already old and no longer the same as before, huh? When Jun Zhantian spoke, His Majesty could clearly hear it. Jun Zhantian called himself old man, but not old subject. This clearly showed the choice in Jun Tian's heart. Brother Jun, what are you talking about? You are indeed old, but vigorous. His Majesty pretended not to hear it, and spoke of the purpose of this banquet under the cover of his drunkenness. Brother Jun, half a year ago, you mentioned to me about the marriage of 2 children. Haha, today I will ask again shamelessly. Is it possible for Raimu and Emosia? Ha! Regarding the marriage, this old man can't make the decision for Emosia now. Let's not talk about the distant matters. Let's talk about Qing Han. In order to save that bastard, she made such a big sacrifice. How can our Jun family let her down? Also, there's the apple of the Dugu family's eye, Sai. It has caused a huge uproar. How could Mo Xie be a match for Princess Ling Ming, a woman of heaven's pride? Grandpa Jun politely declined. Although his tone was tactful, there was no leeway for him to change his mind. Miss Qing Han has sacrificed a lot for Mo Xie. She is indeed a woman of great wisdom and courage. Naturally, she is a good match for Mo Xie. She should be the first choice for the first wife. Naturally, I will not separate them. I believe that Raimu will not mind if Mo Xie is willing to treat her as a co-wife. His Majesty hadn't finished his probing speech when he was interrupted by Grandpa Jun. How can a dignified princess be a co-wife? How is this any different from being a concubine? Where would the face of the royal family go? Grandpa Jun spoke in a righteous and resolute manner. He even said that he was thinking for the sake of the royal family. Speaking of which, it was really ironic. Every dog has its day. Only half a year had passed. Half a year ago, Jun Tian had put down his pride and asked the emperor to marry off his daughter in order to preserve the last of the Jun family's bloodline. At that time, he had been mercilessly rejected. At that time, even he could imagine how embarrassed and desperate Jun Tian must have been. But just half a year later, it was his turn to taste this kind of embarrassment and despair. The subject of the conversation was still Jun Moxie and Princess Raimu. It was still about their marriage. But this time, Jun Tian was just like himself. He refused without any room for negotiation. The 2 people who were talking did not change. The content did not change either. The only difference was that the content was changed one by one. The original rejecter had become the one being rejected. The original requester had become the one being requested. Sure enough, every dog has its day. But how could it take 10 years? In just half a year, the world had been turned upside down. That night, His Majesty the Emperor had lost all hope. From Jun Tian's expression, he already knew the result. The only thing he didn't know was how Jun Moxie would deal with him. But that was no longer important. It didn't matter anymore. In the palace, in another direction, the Empress and Princess Raimu sat facing each other without saying a word. New Year's Eve was supposed to be a night of reunion, but the Emperor and the Empress rejected the proposal at the same time. Both chambers were cold and cheerless, and there was a deathly stillness. During this period of time, Princess Ling Ming had become thinner day by day. Her eyes had become bigger, but her originally healthy and rosy face had now become dry and bloodless. She had become so thin that she looked like she was out of shape. Ming-er, don't torture yourself too much. There is no reason for the younger generation to bear the burden of the previous generation's affairs. The Empress's voice was particularly heavy. She patiently comforted her daughter. Relax. I will take care of everything for you. Princess Raimu shook her head slowly. Her eyes were listless as she looked at the flickering candlelight on the table. 2 drops of tears flowed down slowly. Mother, I don't want to bear this burden. I just feel bad. Bad? Why would you feel bad? Morong Xiao looked at her daughter in a daze. She was extremely surprised. Princess Raimu's face was sad. She murmured, Sin, this is the sin of my previous life. How did things turn out like this? How did it turn out like this? How did it turn out like this? Her usually beautiful eyes were devoid of any spirit, only endless confusion and sadness. Chapter 640. As soon as the words came out, even Murong Xiao herself felt that it was impossible. Her daughter had always thought highly of herself and looked down on all the men in the world, including Li Yuran. Although Jun Moxie's status was extraordinary and his strength was even more amazing, these amazing changes all happened in a very short period of time. Before that, Jun Moxie was just a complete debauchee. How could he enter her daughter's eyes? Moreover, the number of times they met each other could be counted on one hand. At most, they met occasionally when her daughter visited Yigahan. Other than that, they had no other contact, so it was really difficult to link them together. Princess Raimu opened her mouth and lowered her head. No. Although she denied it, it was particularly difficult for her to say it. Before the words left her mouth, a drop of tear fell on the back of her hand. That day, Uncle Yi was seriously injured and dying. Only Jun Moxie could save him. I begged in vain, so I had to make a blood oath. As long as he could keep Uncle Yi alive, then I am willing to marry him, to be his wife or concubine. There's such a thing? Although the Empress also knew that it was the Jun family who saved Yi Gohan, who was seriously injured that day, she did not know the whole story. Especially since this was the first time she heard of this secret, she could not help but open her eyes in surprise. Princess Ling Ming's eyes were filled with tears. She looked at her mother with an indescribable bitterness. Mother, my heart is very bitter. It's very bitter. I only knew that Jun Moxie was the one who saved me. He was also the one who protected me. The mysterious knife-throwing master. It turned out that Jun Moxie's strength was already outstanding. At that time, he was already at the peak of Tian Xian. The Empress was so shocked that she was speechless. Since that day, I have been paying attention to every move of Jun Moxie. I did not let go of any information. I even took out all his previous bad behavior and analyzed them one by one. Mother, now I realize that I am really not as good as Xiao Yi. Xiao Yi can see the good in him, but I can't. I can't see it at all. Too many things were isolated from the inner court of the palace. No matter what they wanted to know, they could only rely on other people's mouths to tell them, and the truth was forever shrouded in a thick fog. We can't see through loyalty, treachery, virtue, and stupidity at all. The so-called good and bad character is also groundless and hard to judge. Princess Ling Ming smiled self-deprecatingly. Mother, I remember when I was young, you once told me that the Imperial Palace is the most glorious place in a country, but it is also the darkest place. It is also the most depressing place. At that time, you would often cry. I don't know why, but at that time, I felt that as the Emperor's daughter, I had a noble status, far above ordinary people. How could I feel depressed? But now I finally understand that the palace is not just what you said. It is also the most hypocritical and filthy place in the world. The people who live in this palace are basically a bunch of fools. No matter how smart a person is, once they enter this place, they will eventually become a fool. So much so that they can't even control their own future. They live their whole lives in hypocrisy and lies, unable to see the truth at all. Mother, this is such a sad thing. The Empress stared blankly at the flickering candlelight and sighed deeply. The candlelight flickered in her eyes like a once-beating dream. As her daughter spoke, she once again thought of the past that she thought she had long forgotten. That lofty and unyielding young man and that pure and beautiful young girl, the sunshine of spring, the fragrance of autumn flowers, the mossy path that they once walked side by side, and the warm embrace that they once snuggled up to. Unknowingly, her eyes were filled with tears. After a long time, she muttered in a mocking and disdainful tone, "Royal family? Glory? Dark, hypocritical, filthy, hee." Murong Xiao's voice was abnormally distant and deep, as if she was talking in a dream. "Mother, are you all right?" Princess Ling Ming was startled by her mother's sudden outburst. She could not help but raise her teary eyes in panic and look at her mother in confusion. I'm fine. I'm just feeling a little emotional." The Empress smiled slightly and used the palest and weakest words to comfort her daughter. She was a bit distracted, and after a moment, she lowered her head slightly. Using the shadow of the lamp, her tears slid down. She said quietly, "Continue. Muhu is listening." "Yes, mother. Take this Jun Moxie, for example. Everyone only saw the surface of his debauchee behavior. They all said that this person is hopeless and that the June family is finished. If Grandpa June dies today, the June family will be destroyed the next day. One person said it, 2 people said it, and 100 people said it. June Moxie's reputation as a debauchee was built up. Now that I think about it, weren't those people who said it all gloating over the misfortune of the June family and adding insult to injury? If June Moxie had really shown his talent since he was young, then he would have been long gone from this world. Princess Raimu said sarcastically, "At least my father couldn't tolerate it. He couldn't tolerate the rise of another June Wuhui, right? Even more so, an existence even sharper than June Wuhui, and he couldn't tolerate such a person coming to seek revenge." Using a tone that was beyond her age, she said in a low voice, "I finally know why June Mo Xie was willing to sacrifice his own feathers. Now that I know what happened in the past, I can imagine how much suffering June Mo Xie had to endure all these years. I'm about the same age as him, but the difference between our experiences is like the difference between the heavens and the earth. In the past, I thought that I was extremely intelligent and talented, but I was nothing compared to June Moxie. The difference was like heaven and earth. In fact, there was no point in comparing them. My childish thinking in the past was not only ridiculous, but it was also very sad. Now his wings are fully fledged, and he has risen in one fell swoop. He doesn't need to hide anymore. In just a short span of half a year, the June family has become a super aristocratic family that no one can shake. The bad habits from before have also disappeared. June Moxie's name is like a spring thunder. It shakes the world. The sad thing is that we only understand it now, and the world has only understood it now. But it's already too late. The expression on Princess Raimu's face became more and more sad. But there was also some pride on her face. In fact, it's not surprising, because he doesn't need to endure it anymore. And he doesn't need to pretend anymore. June Moxie is a man, a real man. Mother, I even feel that June Moxie is not inferior to his father, June Wuhui. What's there to say? You've already fallen in love with him. Otherwise, why would you speak in such a tone? The Empress sighed deeply, but Ming, how did you fall in love with June Moxie? Haven't you always looked down on him? Is it because of a vow? Isn't that too childish? Marrying him and falling in love with him are two completely different things. This is a dead knot that can't be untied. There's absolutely no hope. Meng, what do you want me to say? It's because I hate him that it's easy to change, right? Princess Raima's expression was somewhat perplexed. Mother, do you know this kind of feeling? What you thought was just a small character crawling on the soles of your feet turned out to be a giant dragon that soared above the 9 heavens and ruled over all living things on earth. When a person that you don't even want to look at turns out to be someone you've misunderstood and wronged. What kind of feeling is this? She smiled sadly and said, "Ever since I knew that I've misjudged him, I've been collecting all the information about him. I've tried to infer his true intentions and motives from everything he's done in the past and everything he's said to me. Then, I've considered the June family situation and the general and White's enmity at that time. I've realized that everything he's done has a deeper meaning. Every word he's said has been carefully thought out to suit the environment and atmosphere at that time. Mother, this is wisdom. June Mo Xie is fully deserving of being a real man. A real man. It's easy for a person to drag out an ignoble existence, but it's difficult to endure humiliation. It's just a quick move to die for justice, but it's too difficult to silently endure and even cooperate with other people's contempt. He has peerless talents, but he treats himself like a clown for the sake of his family and hatred. It's too difficult. At least, I can't do it. I can't bear so many supercilious looks. So June Moxie is even more noble. So, as I investigated, I slowly fell into it bit by bit. Just like that, I fell into it. Empress Mother, a man like this is the man of every woman's dreams. How could I be an exception? It's not about the blood oath. I've already treated him as the only man I've acknowledged in this life. Princess Raimu said faintly, but when she raised her head stubbornly, Her face was filled with tears. I know that there's no hope, not even a little bit. Because of this, I said it out loud. Ever since Father mentioned it to me, I knew that there was no possibility between me and him. How can he accept me? But I can't accept it. I really can't accept it. I really can't accept it. Mother, I can't accept that my feelings are gone with the wind. She cried out bitterly. Back then, everyone was trying to deceive me. Everyone was bad-mouthing June Moxie in front of me. Old Duke June came to propose marriage, but was rejected by Father, although I wasn't willing at that time. But if I had known the truth earlier, I would have agreed to it. I would have tried to atone for Father's sins. I would have repaid for the sins we've committed. Even if he doesn't accept it, I was once his wife after all, and I also had him. Do you know, ever since I found out about the suffering he had gone through, my heart ached. Every time after the investigation, I want to hug him in my arms and comfort him. As a man, it's not easy for him. No matter how strong a man is, there will always be a moment of weakness. I really want to be the one to accompany him at that moment. Chapter 641. Sigh. The Empress sighed deeply and looked at her daughter. Suddenly, a heartfelt sense of powerlessness welled up in her heart. Do we have the same fate as mother and daughter? Or is Meng, even more unfortunate than me? I still have a Han's attachment. At least I have loved him, but Meng has unrequited love from beginning to end. It's so pitiful. Murong Xiao quietly pondered for a long time. She slowly stood up and looked at her daughter lovingly. She paced back and forth a few times. Suddenly, an indescribable fierceness and madness burst out in her eyes. From the side, the gentle and beautiful face of the Empress, the dignified face of the Empress, seemed a bit ferocious at this moment. My life has long been ruined, completely ruined in the hands of that man. Do I have to watch my own daughter's life also be ruined in his hands? She is my only daughter, and also the source of all my blood and sweat. She thought silently, and the look in her eyes became more and more tragic and crazy. I have to work hard for my daughter. Even if I can't succeed, at least I have done my best as a mother. She was so excited that she gasped violently. This gasp sounded as if she was tearing her throat. It was so hysterical. Mother, Princess Raimu looked up worriedly. It's okay. It's really okay. The Empress lowered her head, as if she didn't dare to let her daughter see the fire in her eyes. She just slowly waved her hand and said, "Don't think about it anymore. It's getting late. Go back and rest." The Empress' heart seemed to shatter as she watched her daughter obediently and sadly disappear from her line of sight. Gritting her teeth, her cheeks puffed up as she finally made up her mind. She stood up and refused to be served by the palace maids. She put on a coat and suddenly said coldly, "Call for a sedan chair. I want to leave the imperial palace and go to the June family. Your Majesty, it's already late at night." The maid looked at her in fear. "Didn't you hear what I said?" The Empress glared and said loudly. This was the first time she had spoken in such a harsh tone since she entered the palace. "Yes, this servant will go." The palace maid was so scared that she almost collapsed to the ground and hurried out. The Empress laughed self-mockingly. Hearing the footsteps outside, she suddenly tightened her collar and walked out without hesitation. When she walked out of the palace gate, a black shadow flashed out from the darkness like a phantom and followed her step by step like a shadow. "Agio, where are the new guards on duty now?" Before the Empress got on the sedan chair, she asked in an extremely indifferent tone. "I heard he wasn't on duty. They were all in the Imperial Guard camp and formed their own brigade. That group of people were all very arrogant, and their skills were also very good. Usually I don't see them do anything, but recently they've been quite well behaved." The shadow-like Agio pondered for a moment before replying cautiously. You've only started behaving since half a month ago, right?" The Empress asked indifferently with a hint of mockery in her eyes. Half a month ago was the time when June Moxie had returned to Tianxiang City. "Yes, and they've been in the 3 battalions since then. They haven't come out. No one has come out," Agio replied carefully. He didn't dare to look at the Emperor's face because he could hear the gloominess and bloodthirst in the Emperor's tone. The Bloodsword Hall was behind the Yi family's massacre, wasn't it? The Empress lowered her voice and asked. Yes, but almost everyone in the capital knew about it at the time. So, it wasn't a secret at all, Ah Jiu replied in astonishment. Only then did he realize that the Empress had already boarded the carriage. The wind was cold, and it was already the latter half of the night. There were no stars or moon as the carriage rolled out of the palace gate. What did you say? The Empress went to the Jun family at a time like this? The Emperor frowned. His face was frighteningly gloomy. He had drunk a lot of wine, and his head was drooping weakly. But he suddenly raised his head as soon as he heard these words. His eyes shot out a hawk-like gaze, fierce and cruel. Yes, the guard knelt on the ground and didn't dare to raise his head. I know. You can go now. The Emperor leaned back and closed his eyes tiredly. His fingers gently rubbed the space between his eyebrows. The ruthless look on his face became more intense, and his breathing became more rapid. He murmured, She went to the Jun family at a time like this? Why? 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 The more he thought about it, the more panic flashed across his face. Then, a hysterical look emerged on his face. He roared in a low voice. Why can't I go at a time like this? Why are you going now? Are you trying to sell me out? Morong Xiao Xiao, I've tolerated you for a long time. For a long time. He roared loudly. The alcohol had eroded his eyes into a blood-red color, and he looked ferocious. Then, he suddenly said decisively, Someone, ask Mr. Wen to come here. Brother Wen, I want to ask you to do something for me. Please. The elegant Mr. Wen had a smile on his face. He had just arrived, and the Emperor had already made a request. How could I dare? What's the matter? Oh, this old man has come here today to inform His Majesty of something. Mr. Wen smiled as he looked at the Emperor. Mr. Wen also has a matter? Please speak first, Mr. Wen. His Majesty had a smile on his face, but the muscles on his dignified face were faintly twitching. His 3 strands of beard were also trembling slightly. His eyebrows were brimming with murderous intentions. This old man will leave the Tianxiang Imperial Palace tomorrow and return to the Great Golden City. I won't be the only one returning this time. The entire Xianxian continent's people who have been stationed in the various imperial palaces will be withdrawn starting tomorrow. We won't meddle in worldly affairs from now on, Mr. Wen said with a smile. This old man will leave the Tianxiang Imperial Palace tomorrow and return to the Great Golden City. I won't be the only one returning this time. All the people who have been stationed in the Xianxian continent's imperial palaces will be withdrawn starting tomorrow. We won't meddle in worldly affairs from now on. We won't meddle in any form or by any means, Mr. Wen said with a smile. What? How? His Majesty suddenly stood up. He looked at the man in front of him in disbelief. He couldn't believe his own ears. I'm sorry, but it's true, Mr. Wen said in a serious tone. His indifferent words had thoroughly shattered the Emperor's last shred of hope. Why has such a decision been made so suddenly? I asked Mr. Wen to explain clearly. His Majesty slowly sat back down. His face exposed a trace of bitterness as he asked in a low voice. I don't know about this. This decision has been made by the highest level of the Golden City. I'm powerless to do anything about it. Mr. Wen looked at the man in front of him. Your Majesty, you take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. What I need to take care of myself. His Majesty chuckled. His face was full of loneliness. He slowly shook his head and said in a low voice, I've been governing the country cautiously and conscientiously. I've been handling official affairs day and night. I'm afraid that I've been handling them more than I had in the past few years. I don't have much time left. So, I'll naturally do my best to handle them well. I'll go and have a drink with Junwu Hui. Right? Wrong? This is ridiculous. Ha ha ha. He was laughing, but his eyes didn't have the slightest hint of a smile. Instead, they were filled with sorrow. The Crown Prince? Mr. Wen frowned. Mr. Wen, it's time to leave. So, let's decide on the successor today. The first prince will be the Crown Prince. His Majesty sighed deeply. A look of powerlessness flashed in his eyes. He's the only one among the 3 princes. The other 2 are unworthy. Your Majesty, Are you worried that June Moxie will take revenge? Mr. Wen asked. Mr. Wen, do you think that June Moxie won't take revenge? Or will he never find out the truth? His Majesty asked back. Paper can't wrap up fire. So what if he can't find any evidence? Does he still need any evidence? Mr. Wen smiled and said in a heavy tone, Brother Wen, I believe that after you leave this time, the two of us will never have the chance to meet again in this lifetime. His Majesty's words were extremely sorrowful. He turned his head and looked at the dark night outside. Then he slowly said, When I have been living together for so many years. We may not be brothers, but we are like brothers. How can Brother Wen bear to leave? Mr. Wen became silent for a long time. Then he sighed and said, Actually, I don't want to leave. You haven't treated me as an emperor in these years. I've been indebted to you, but I don't know how to repay you. Brother Wen, I want you to do something for me. His Majesty suddenly raised his head. His eyes were filled with madness. His murderous intention flickered in them. You'll leave tomorrow. Just take it as a parting gift to me before you leave. Please speak, Your Majesty. I've been living in the Imperial Palace for so many years, and I've been feeling very restless. I'm about to leave, so I'll feel a little relieved if I can do something for Your Majesty. Mr. Wen was silent for a moment. Then he resolutely replied. The Empress left the palace a moment ago. She went to the June family. His Majesty's voice was hoarse. It was mixed with deep pain and helplessness. She has been in a cold war with me all this time. She looked at me as if she was looking at an irreconcilable enemy. I put up with her for 18 years. And she's going to the June family at this time. The Emperor of Tianxiang, Yang Huaiyu's voice sounded like that of a wounded beast. He was growling in a low voice. His face had become extremely distorted. He had become extremely ferocious. His hands were tightly clenched into fists. 18 years. I put up with her. I've loved her crazily. I've been infatuated with her. But I've never been able to get even the slightest bit of her sincerity. I've been guarding this shell of mine. But I've never been able to get anything more. From the beginning to the end, I, the ruler of a nation, can't even compare to that traitorous bastard Yi Guhan. His Majesty made threatening gestures as he roared. He suddenly grabbed the wine cup, but it was already empty, so he threw it aside in annoyance. Then he picked up the wine pot and gulped it down. Chapter 642. Bang! The jug of wine fell on the table and issued a crisp sound. And now, she has left me for the June family. The June family, what kind of place is that? Everyone there wants me dead. They all want me dead. And she's gone there on the eve of the New Year's Eve. The blue veins on his forehead bulged and throbbed. He took a few deep breaths and finally burst out. Moreover, Yi Guhan is waiting for her there. He's waiting for her in agony. Mr. Wen remained silent. He couldn't meddle in the secret affairs of the imperial family. In fact, he didn't want to meddle in them. The only thing he could do was to listen. Right now, His Majesty lacked someone to listen to him. Therefore, he played the role of the emperor faithfully. My life is coming to an end, and it could be extinguished at any time. That brat June Moxie will never let me off. The emperor was panting heavily as a look of madness flashed in his eyes. He was pacing back and forth in the room. He didn't have the grace and dignity of the past. In fact, he looked like a lion that had been locked in a cage, impatient and furious. Kill her. He suddenly stopped, stood still, and spat out these words from between his teeth. His eyes were bloodshot. Mr. Wen was horrified. He raised his head and looked at the Tianxiang Empire's emperor in disbelief. This man had obviously been tortured to the point of collapse. Kill her, the emperor repeated, but his words were even clearer this time. His eyes flashed with a cold, cruel light. In fact, it seemed as if he had personally destroyed the thing he loved the most. He fixed his eyes on Mr. Wen and suddenly took 2 steps forward. Then he grasped Mr. Wen's shoulders tightly and spoke in a desperate voice. Brother Wen, please help me kill this slut. Mr. Wen was shocked, speechless. The emperor had asked him to do one last thing before he left, and that one thing was to kill his empress. He had killed a woman whom he had loved to death just a moment ago. In fact, he had fallen madly in love with her. What a preposterous thing this was. Why? Mr. Wen's voice sounded dry and hollow. Why? Ha ha! His Majesty looked up to the sky and laughed maniacally. He said loudly, "Since ancient times, the winner has always been king and the loser has always been in the wrong. If the June family didn't rise, then the June family would have naturally died out in Tianxiang. And the wealth left behind by the June family would have naturally belonged to the nation. When that time comes, I will no longer have to worry about someone trying to usurp the throne, nor will I have to worry about my reputation as a god of war. I will even have the strength to sweep through the world. With my great talent and bold vision, it is only a matter of time before I destroy Yutang and devour Shun Tian. But the heavens are making fools of me. The June family has produced June Moxie, and all my efforts have been wasted. Now that things have come to this, there's no point in saying anything more. I participated in the murder of June Moxie that day. It's understandable that June Moxie came to kill me to avenge his father. I don't blame him. No, don't blame him. I hate him. Mother ****, who is he? If Jun Wu Hui died, then so be it. I am the emperor of Tianxiang. What right does he have to avenge me? Yang Huaiyu was drunk, and his words were incoherent. But he still said fiercely, I am the emperor, and he is the subject. The emperor and the subject are like father and son. If the emperor wants the subject to die, the subject has no choice but to die. This is the norm. What right does the June family have to avenge me? Even if I kill him with my own hands, it's still the June family's glory. Revenge? Bastard. How can they take revenge on their own emperor? The June family is simply a family of bastards. He took a few deep breaths. Treacherous son of AB***TCH. But the current June family is too strong. I believe that even Sir can't compete with them. So, I don't ask Sir to target the June family. But Morong Xiao must die. She is my woman, my empress. Why should she meet her lover on New Year's Eve? She might even reveal my secret. She betrayed me to June Moxie. She has no choice but to die. How could she not die? He roared at the sky with his hands wide open. But this is only your guess. It's not the truth. Wouldn't it be a joke if you killed your own empress just because of your suspicions? Mr. Wen frowned. It's not a guess. That's for sure. I'm sure. His Majesty's face was red. His eyes were ferocious as he panted. Besides, she can't live even if it's just a guess. He paused for a while, and then suddenly roared, She is my most beloved woman. Just based on this, she deserves to die. He smiled maliciously. Why should I keep my woman alive if I'm going to die at any moment? Leave her and her old lover to live happily ever after? Ha ha ha. She's my woman for one day. She'll be my woman for the rest of her life. I'll take my woman with me, even if she dies. No, I'll make her wait for me in the underworld. I won't be at ease. I won't be at ease, even if she dies one day later than me. I'll dominate her forever, even if I can't win her heart. I'm the emperor of Tianxiang. How can I endure such humiliation? He suddenly raised his leg and kicked the carved table in front of him. It crashed into the ceiling of the palace and broke into pieces with a loud sound. So she must die. She must die before me. Mr. Wen sighed sadly. His Majesty's jealousy and hatred had clearly gotten to his head. You had countless opportunities to kill her in this matter. So, why did you make me do it? Mr. Wen frowned in a helpless manner. I can't bear to do it. I can't bear to do it. How can I bear to do it? The Emperor roared furiously. It seemed as if he was very dissatisfied with his own weakness. She has never loved me. But she's the only woman I've ever truly loved in my life. I wouldn't have thought of killing her if she hadn't gone to the June family today, because no one would have been able to keep me in a Cold War if I had killed her. I would have been very lonely, very uncomfortable. He suddenly rushed over and grabbed Mr. Wen's hand. Brother Wen, help me. Help me this time. Kill her for me. He eagerly looked into Mr. Wen's eyes. You'll be returning to the great Golden City tomorrow. So, Killing such a person will be as easy as blowing off dust for you. Then, you'll be able to escape to a faraway place after you've killed her. The June family won't be able to shake the great golden city, even if they wish to pursue this matter, right? Mr. Wen looked up to the sky and sighed. The expression on his face fluctuated. It was full of contradictions and entanglements. Brother Wen, please help me this time. Tears flowed out of the Emperor's eyes, but they were flashing with a crazed color. I can't allow my woman to be held in the arms of another man. And I can't bear to see that scumbag Yi Guhan pressing her between his legs. Please help me. Help us husband and wife. This is my last wish. And it's also the only request I'll make of you since we've known each other for a lifetime. All right. Mr. Wen thought for a long time. Then he finally agreed with great difficulty. It was obvious that this was a very painful decision for him. I'll go, but I'll leave after I kill her, and I won't come back. Thank you, Brother Wen. The Emperor bowed deeply and said, she has just left the imperial palace. So, she shouldn't have gone far yet. So, she shouldn't have reached the June family yet. Brother Wen, you should be able to make it in time. I'm counting on you. Now, Mr. Wen's eyes narrowed. Now. The Emperor nodded deeply. Good. Mr. Wen's thin face revealed a trace of anger. His calm and indifferent face twitched a little as he slowly said, I, Wen Sangyu, have lived an upright life, and I've never done anything wrong to anyone. But I'm about to leave this world forever, and the last thing I'm going to do is to kill a woman who has no enmity with me. In a dark corner outside the palace, a slender and graceful figure was trembling all over. Her eyes were filled with tears as she quietly retreated. She slowly moved out of the palace. Then, her body suddenly trembled as she tried to suppress her sobs. She frantically ran out of the palace. That person was none other than Princess Raimu. She had come out from her mother's place. But she remembered that she hadn't paid her respects to her father on New Year's Eve. So, she forced herself to come even though she didn't want to, because she wanted to ask her father a question. I want to ask him if he's willing to bow down to the June family. Is he willing to repent to Jun Wuhui? In this young girl's dreams, as long as my proud father is willing to bow down to me, will this hatred be alleviated? But as soon as he arrived here, he heard his father's loud roar. Finally, his curiosity was aroused. He quietly waved his hand to summon the guard over, and then asked him to leave. He stood in the position of the guard. Originally, he wanted to hear why his father was unhappy, but he didn't expect to hear such a thing. This was like a bolt from the blue for her. The imperial father that he had respected the most since he was young was actually going to kill his beloved imperial mother. This cruel reality almost made Princess Raimu faint on the spot. But she didn't dare to faint. In fact, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to hold on, because her mother was in danger. She had always thought that her father was dignified and benevolent. He doted on her. He was a good emperor and a good father. But she had seen her 3 brothers fight for the throne, and all of this was planned by her father. So her view of him changed a little. Then she found out about the death of Tianxiang's white commander, Jun Wuhui, and her father had played an extremely dishonorable role in it, and a knot had formed in her heart. But Princess Raimu's heart had finally turned to ashes today. All of her hopes and fantasies had been destroyed. So, my father is such a person after all. He's extremely selfish, cruel, cold, paranoid, and a complete pervert. He killed my mother, and he hired someone to kill her. Such an unimaginable thing happened right in front of my eyes. A husband wants to kill his wife because of jealousy and suspicion, his most beloved woman. An emperor wants to kill the empress because he suspects that his woman will be enjoyed by someone else after his death. This is the most ridiculous joke in the world. Princess Lingming ran for quite a distance before crying out loud. She ran and cried until she reached the imperial stables. She tore off the reins of the horse and mounted it. She clamped her thighs together and whipped the horse's buttocks. She shouted at the top of her lungs, "Jia!" The horse neighed. Its front hooves left the ground. Then It galloped forward like an arrow, piercing through the night sky of the imperial palace. "Who is it?" The guards at the palace gate shouted. "It's me. Open the gate." Princess Raimu's eyes were filled with tears. "Yes, so it's your highness." The guards hurriedly bowed and opened the palace gate. Princess Ling Meng exerted force on her leg, and the healthy horse let out a long neigh as it leapt forward like a cloud. It passed through several palace gates, and the sound of its hooves was like a sudden clap of thunder. In an instant, it had disappeared into the distance, leaving behind countless snowflakes. At the same time, a slender figure silently rose into the air from within the imperial palace. It flew over 70 to 80 feet in the air, and suddenly, like a huge flag being swept up by a gale, it unfolded in the air and disappeared without a trace with a whoosh. The emperor stood in front of the window. There was a proud and cruel smile on his face. "I left in a hurry last night, so I made a few mistakes. Why copy the chapter? I didn't know what happened. I copied it twice and clicked on the edit button, but it still went back. I repeated more than 90 words. The second mistake was that I wrote the wrong words in the chapter. Already updated became first updated. I was speechless. I just finished writing the chapter last night and was about to go to bed. Today, I went to cook for my uncle. Then, I got a call when I was uploading the chapter. My aunt couldn't take the blow and collapsed. Acute myocardial infarction. I finished the chapter in a few minutes and went home in a hurry. Luckily, she was saved in time. Now, she was out of danger. Sigh. I broke out in a cold sweat. I felt cold all over when I was walking on the road. I had a bad feeling. Let me explain briefly. There are 2 updates today. To make up for yesterday's repeated mistakes, I will give you 500 words for the first update. I hope my brothers and sisters can forgive me. All my brothers and sisters know that I usually give at least 100 words for free, or 300 or 200 words for each chapter. It's not for anything else. It's not that I don't like writing new chapters to earn money. I like money, really, but I hope that I can use these words to make up for the punctuation in the main text. This reason might be funny or stupid, but I've been doing this for 2 years. Maybe I don't give much, but please believe that I've tried my best. I will try my best to make up for the punctuation in each chapter with free words. Chapter 643. Your Majesty, the princess's face was full of tears just now. She rushed out on her horse and was in a bad mood. We did not dare to stop her. The guard at the door came to report. Raimu. The emperor was startled. He suddenly sneered and said, "Both mother and daughter are going to abandon me to meet their lover? Haha, forget it. Don't worry about her. Bring me wine. Today I want to celebrate." Yes. The cold wind whistled through the air, and the dust like snowflakes were blown up into the air, fluttering in the air. This was the most prosperous street of the Tianxiang city, but at this moment it seemed somewhat eerie. Under the protection of 100 guards, a small yellow sedan chair, decorated with tassels and ribbons, moved forward at a steady pace. Murong Xiaoxiao's beautiful face flashed with hesitation and struggle. Do I really have to do this? The next moment, a lonely and desolate man seemed to appear in front of her, but his eyes that had been filled with despair for a long time were still affectionate and passionate. Little Han. A trace of heartfelt tenderness appeared on Murong Xiaoxiao's face. Although she had never shown such an expression when she saw Yi Gahan, every time she heard his name in the dead of night, she would feel bitter in her heart. It was also because of this bitterness that she felt that she was still a person, and a woman at that. This deep affection had tortured the 3 of them for their entire lives. It became a nightmare and an eternal scar in the heart of Tianxiang Empire's Yang Huaiyu. It had also become an everlasting memory in the hearts of Murong Xiaoxiao and Yi Gahan. In this quiet night, Murong Xiaoxiao found herself strangely recalling too many things from the past. The deep feelings of the past, the solemn vows of eternal love, all of them were still vivid in her mind. It was as if on this short road, she was replaying everything in her life, no matter how big or small. Little Han, it's been hard on you. Murong Xiaoxiao's face was full of tears. At this moment, She suddenly remembered a poem that Yith Gahan had left for her before he fled to the ends of the world. She could not help but smile miserably. She took out a plain white handkerchief from her bosom. On it, there were a few lines of small blood-red words embroidered in a flamboyant manner. I don't regret this life's deep affection. I'm willing to wander alone. I hate that lovers are only in dreams. I'd rather betray the heavens than you. After Yi Gahan left, Murong Xiao embroidered this handkerchief and kept it close to her body. However, no one knew that this bright red handwriting was Murong Xiao's own blood. She used her own blood to soak the white thread red. Then, she threaded the needle and, stitch by stitch, embroidered the last poem given to her by the person she loved the most on her handkerchief. It had survived until today. Just a few days ago, there were 2 more lines of words, the same bright red. If the fate in the next life has not ended, I would rather betray the heavens than betray you. These were the last 2 lines of the poem that Yi Gahan had recently revised. After Murong Xiao finished embroidering these 2 lines, she embroidered another word below, looking forward to it. Little Han, not only are you looking forward to it, I'm also looking forward to it. If the fate in the next life has not ended, I would rather betray the heavens than betray you. If there's a next life, I will only belong to you. I will smile for you, cry for you, shed tears for you, rejoice for you, bear children for you, and grow old with you. Even if I'm poor, even if I'm lowly, as long as you and I can be together, I will not regret it. Little Han, the world is singing praises for Junwu Hui and Dongfang when Xin. They are all feeling sorry for them and sympathizing with them. But who knows how much I envy them. Although they are separated by life and death, they have been husband and wife for more than 10 years after all. With such a relationship, he once had her, and she once had him. They are so happy. But we have never had each other, little Han. The man I love the most, do you know every time I see you how sour my heart is, how painful my heart is in the next life and the next life. Your Highness, the June residence is in front. The guard at the front of the carriage turned around and reported respectfully. When he spoke, Murong Xiao had just finished recalling the ups and downs of her life. She was drifting in her thoughts as if she was in a fog. This sentence woke Murong Xiao up from her dream. She lifted the curtain and looked outside. Her eyes were still misty. So fast, so fast. The guard were speechless. The road was snowy and slippery at night. We were so careful all the way, so how could we be fast? It was clearly slow. A gust of wind blew the snowflakes onto Murong Xiao's face as she lifted the curtain. Suddenly, she shivered and had an ominous premonition. Was there no way ahead? Or has my road come to an end? At this moment, a hurricane suddenly rolled up, right above her, and rushed towards the carriage with the force of a thunderbolt. There was a flash of light, and there was a sword in the hurricane. "Be careful, Her Majesty!" the guard cried out in horror. In the distance, the thunderous sound of horse hooves rolled over like a storm. To gallop on a horse in the middle of the night, when the ground was frozen like a mirror, was either a madman or a madman. Once they fell, they would either have their hands or legs broken or die on the spot. It was simply a waste of one's life. A weak but hysterical cry could be heard in the wind. "Imperial Mother, be careful! Imperial Mother, be careful!" The voice was broken by the bone-chilling wind, but one could hear the infinite despair and panic in the voice. In the cold winter night, Princess Raimu galloped madly on her horse. Her hair was disheveled, and the cold wind blew on her face, freezing the tears on her face. Murong Xiao also heard the guard's exclamation, saw the approaching hurricane, and vaguely saw a vague figure in the hurricane. The sound of horse hooves behind also entered her ears. She also heard her daughter's heart-wrenching cry clearly in the cold wind, but she suddenly found that she could not move, as if she had fallen into an ice cave. Under the shroud of such an earth-shattering Xian skill, she had no power to protect herself, and could only wait for death. But on her peaceful face, there was a trace of relief, and, I going to die? Ah, a wolf-like howl of despair rang out. Agio's shadow-like figure suddenly appeared. He kicked the palanquin, and the entire palanquin rapidly retreated. At this moment, the advantage of the frozen ground was revealed, and it actually quickly slid out. Meanwhile, his skinny figure lit up with a bright yellow radiance. With a loud roar, he soared into the air and faced the hurricane in midair. The figure in the hurricane, the peak of Earth Xian, the Emperor's personal guard, turned out to be an expert at the peak of Earth Xian. However, the assassin was none other than Mr. Wen. He was a supreme master. Not to mention an Earth Xian, even a peak of Tian Xian could be killed in seconds. What was a mere peak of Earth Xian? But he still managed to stop him. Blood exploded in midair. Agio's body had just rushed up when he instantly turned into a sky full of flesh and blood. Drops of blood fell like a rain of blood, falling one after another. But Mr. Wen's figure was faster than the rain of blood. He was like a demon god descending from the heavens, flying down from the sky. He was carrying a small package on his back. Once he killed Murong Xiao, he would immediately fly away and return to the supreme Golden City. From then on, he would no longer be concerned about the mortal world. Protect the Empress. Dozens of guards stood in front of the palanquin with their swords. At this moment, Murong Xiao flipped over and rolled out of the palanquin, landing on the snow. At the same time, the palanquin was hit by the palm force and split into pieces. Mr. Wen did not say a word. He swung his sword and a ray of sword energy flashed out. The dozens of guards in front of him screamed as they were all cut in half. The sword energy penetrated their bodies and left a deep sword mark on the ground. Snowflakes flew everywhere. The sound of hooves approached. Princess Raimu rushed over desperately. She jumped off the horse and almost fell down. She madly rushed to her mother, who was lying on the ground, and screamed, "Mother!" Mr. Wen's figure did not stop. He hesitated for a moment, and then his right palm flew out with a bang. Even in the air, a black hole in the shape of a palm was formed and hit Murong Xiao's back. "Stop!" A ghostly figure appeared out of nowhere. His body had yet to arrive, but he had already unleashed a force to intercept Mr. Wen's palm wind. However, he was still a step too late. Although most of the force had been dissipated, there was still a strong force that hit Murong Xiao's back with a loud bang. Murong Xiao let out a muffled groan. Her delicate body was hit and flew off the ground. She spat out a mouthful of red blood in midair. She was like a flower that had been forcibly plucked from a branch and fell powerlessly from the sky. Her light yellow dress unfolded in the air like a delicate flower that had withered in the snowy night. "Mother!" Princess Ling Ming was frightened out of her wits and rushed forward. Seeing that it was too late, she leapt forward without any regard for her life. Her body fell heavily onto the ground, and with a kacha sound, her knees made contact with the hard ice and shattered. But she did not feel it. She just stretched out her hand and firmly caught her mother's body as if she was catching the only thing she could rely on in her life. Crack! The strong momentum caused Princess Ling Ming to fall backwards as she caught hold of her mother. Her knees, which were already broken, were still kneeling on the ground. Her entire upper body was bent backwards, and the back of her head slammed heavily onto the icy surface of the snowy ground. A crisp sound came from her knees as she knelt on the ground. Fresh blood instantly flowed out. If one lifted her dress to take a look, they would definitely see that the joints of her knees were completely shattered. Her delicate skin and flesh had long been split open, and the pale white broken bones were also exposed outside. However, this girl who had been pampered since she was a child had revealed her extreme toughness at this moment. Even a spirit Xian expert wouldn't be able to endure such pain. However, this little girl had withstood it. Moreover, the back of her head had started to bleed profusely. However, she had held onto her mother's body and hadn't let her mother's body suffer even the slightest impact. Murong Xiao opened her eyes with difficulty. She looked at her daughter, who was in despair and sorrow with a trace of tenderness and affection on her face. She wanted to say, "Ming-er, don't be afraid. I'm fine. But when she opened her mouth, she spat out a mouthful of blood again. This time, it was accompanied by pieces of internal organs. She wanted to raise her hand and wipe away the tears on her beloved daughter's face, but she found that she could not even move a finger. She could only endure the intense pain in her body, but she tried her best to look indifferent. She looked at her daughter with gentle eyes and tried her best to tell her, "Mother is not in pain, really not in pain." Chapter 644. Mother, Mother, ah! Princess Raimu screamed at the sky, crazily. She no longer called her Mother Empress, because she felt that the word Mother Empress was the greatest insult to her mother. That man was not fit to be her mother's man. I don't want the identity he gave me. I don't want it. The cold night was like ice, and her heart was like a cold night. Junmo, Sierra returned to his courtyard as soon as the lively family banquet was over. This period of time was a rare period of peace. But young Master Jun still needed to find time to practice his medicine and martial arts. And he couldn't afford to slack off on these matters. It had to be said that Jun Dashao was too popular recently. Just before he left, Dongfang Wenxin's eyes were full of love and reluctance, and Dugu Xiaoyi even pouted and refused to let him go. They almost followed him to the courtyard. Guanqing Han glanced at him, but because the elders were present, she did not say anything. Even that glance was as indifferent as usual. However, Jun Moxie automatically thought too much. Why did she look at me? Could it be? He couldn't help but feel excited. There was also the little princess Han, Yinming Han. She endured her embarrassment and finished the meal. She actually did not leave and stayed until the end of the banquet. Only then did she angrily glare at Jun Moxie and bared her teeth in a threatening manner. However, one sentence from Jun Moxie made the little girl flee. Am I good looking? Am I good to look at? If it's not enough, you can come and warm the bed tonight. Anyway, it's only a matter of time. Thus, the little girl threw away her armor and ran away like a wisp of smoke, disappearing without a trace. As he walked to the entrance of the courtyard, Jun Moxie was stunned. Why didn't he hear Yi Gahan's roar today? Ever since the two little guys, Tian Kan, DK, and Bailey Luo Yun, were brought back by Lung Ao, they had been living here. Other than practicing, they were learning sword skills from Yi Gahan. In fact, it was not appropriate to say that they were learning sword skills. The sword skills that Jun Dashao knew were much higher than Yi Gahan's. Therefore, the two little ones learned most from Yi Gahan in terms of combat experience and adaptability. And most importantly, even though Jun Moxie was knowledgeable, he was not a crippled person. He could not compare to a crippled, but not crippled martial artist like Yi Gahan. Yi Guhan would appear at the side to give them pointers as soon as they started to practice their swordsmanship. Although the swordsmanship of the two had come from Jun and Mo Xie, and the level of the swordsmanship itself was far beyond the scope of Yi Guhan's field of vision. Yi Guhan had traveled all over the world, and his combat experience was exceptionally rich. Usually, the two little mistakes would be pointed out by him immediately, followed by a merciless reprimand. The two of them were determined people to begin with. In the face of their own mistakes, they did not shy away from it and repeatedly practiced it until they were correct, skillful, and perfect. In order to further increase the cultivation of the two little ones, Jun and Mo Xie had also used his own pure spiritual energy to imbue them with a series of muscles and bones. So in these few days, with many aspects improving simultaneously, the strength of the two little ones naturally increased by leaps and bounds, improving by leaps and bounds. In addition, after they learned ventriloquism, they were naturally extremely excited after not speaking for a long time. They chattered nonstop. They were not born mute. It was only because their tongues were cut off that they could not speak again. Now that they could speak again, they naturally wanted to talk to their heart's content. But that kind of situation, even Jun Moxie felt a little creeped out. The two little ones sat facing each other, and neither of them spoke, but the sound of their conversation would suddenly appear in the empty space. It was almost as if there was a ghost. In these few days, Yi Gahan's newly created one-armed sword skill had also reached the stage of completion. Although Yi Gahan did not have enough profound energy and could not use it freely, and its power was inevitably greatly reduced. He clearly knew that the one-armed sword skill that was created from the foundation of Jun Moxie's one-armed sword skill was much more powerful than the original sword skill. Because this set of sword skill contained too much of Yi Gahan's own death aura and solemnity. The biggest characteristic of this set of sword skill was its sharpness to the extreme. Moreover, because it was wielded with only one arm, the angle of each sword was unimaginable and all stabbed from impossible directions. If he were to fight against an expert of the same level, he would definitely have the upper hand, especially against an opponent who was 2 levels higher than him. Even if he were to fight against an expert who was 2 levels higher, he would still be able to cause his opponent to panic. Yi Gahan was very proud of himself for being able to create such a set of sword skill, and he was also very confident. But tonight, the 2 youngsters were still practicing their sword skills, but Yi Gahan did not stand by the side to guide them. His bleak figure stood under the flowering tree, and from time to time, he would frown as he paced back and forth. He was actually very irritated and seemed to have a very bad temperament. This kind of negative emotion had not appeared in him for a long time, and it was naturally very unusual to see it today. During the time that he stayed in the Jun residence, from the time he was injured to the time he recovered, from the time he was dispirited due to his lack of Xian Qi, to the time when he saw the sword skill with only one arm, Yi Gahan had always been a man of few words, and his face was always as indifferent as Ling Ling's. In addition, his personality was also very eccentric, and it was very rare for him to interact with anyone other than the 2 youngsters. Even when the 3rd master, Jun Wui, took the initiative to talk to him, it was rare for him to say a few words. But at least he no longer had that feeling of despair when he was injured, and there was a little more vitality in him. But today, on this New Year's Eve, this death aura that had already dissipated appeared on his body again. It appeared on Yi Gahan's body. Even Yi Gahan felt somewhat abnormal. In fact, he felt very uncomfortable. What's wrong with me today? Today was the New Year's Eve, and it was the time to relax, but why was he always upset? No matter what he did, he was absent-minded, and even the words he said were wrong. He often stopped talking, and when he wanted to continue, he couldn't remember what he wanted to say at all. But there was one thing that was very clear. Yi Gahan only felt that the shadow of Murong Xiao in his heart was getting clearer and clearer. Usually, he could forcibly suppress this longing, but tonight at this special time, it was so uncontrollable. In the haze, it seemed that Murong Xiao was slowly walking towards him with a smile. Her eyebrows were picturesque, and she was smiling sweetly, just like her innocent and playful appearance 18 years ago. But when Yi Gahan wanted to extend his arm to hug her, she floated away in an instant, leaving only a pair of sad and helpless eyes, as if she was pleading for something. Xiao. What's wrong with you? Is it you? Is it you? What do you want to say? What do you want to say? Yi Gahan held his head in pain and turned back and forth frantically. There seemed to be a fire burning in his heart, and there was also a knife twisting in it. He seemed to have noticed something, but it didn't seem like there was anything. There seemed to be some hint in the haze, but Yi Gahan felt that he couldn't break through the layer of fog in front of him no matter what. Jun Moxie walked over slowly, and when he saw Yi Gahan's appearance, he couldn't help but be startled. What's wrong with this affectionate person today? At this moment, Yi Gahan finally couldn't stand anymore. He strode over, and his eyes flashed with madness. Jun Sunxiao, can you take me to the palace? Yi Gahan's tone was admittedly sincere, but it was mixed with indescribable, extreme irritation. He only knew that he wanted to kill someone at this moment. His heart was inexplicably irritable. In fact, he was extremely irritable. In fact, Yi Gahan felt that he would have bitten and eaten his enemy if he had been in front of him. Go to the palace? For what? Today is New Year's Eve. It's not convenient, right? Jun Moxie frowned and looked at him in amusement. Has this brother's unrequited love gone berserk? Go to the palace at this time? Do you want to embarrass yourself? With your image, do you want to go to someone else's territory and humiliate yourself? At this moment, Jun Moxie's expression inexplicably tightened, and his complexion became exceptionally heavy. He could clearly feel a hidden and powerful aura rushing over from the direction of the palace, and its target was the June family's residence. He could also hear the rapid sound of horse hooves coming from that direction. Did something really happen? June Mo. Siet didn't have the time to pay attention to Yigu Han. In the next moment, he had already appeared at the top of the tower. He raised his eyes and looked into the distance. Just as he climbed up the tower, a shrill scream pierced the night sky. The place where the scream was coming from was not far from the June family's residence. June Moxie's heart shook, and he immediately activated the Yin-Yang escape and appeared at the scene of the incident. He just happened to see a whirlwind of shadows attacking a group of people and horses. June Moxie recognized the palanquin at a glance. It was the Empress palanquin. The Empress had often visited the June family's residence, and although she hadn't visited for a long time, her unique ceremonial guard was still recognizable. As for the blurry shadow, June Moxie also recognized it as Mr. One. Looking at the direction of the palanquin, it was heading towards the June family's residence, and the Emperor's close friend was attacking the palanquin of the current Empress. What did this mean? The answer was obvious. The Empress must have come to harm the Emperor. Otherwise, she wouldn't have taken such drastic measures to kill the Empress. To harm the Emperor. The Empress' destination was the June family's residence. That meant it was beneficial to the June family. Otherwise, why would the Emperor send a master to kill his Empress? Although it was only a glimpse, June and Moxie had already understood the situation in an instant. Therefore, June Moxie acted immediately. However, when he arrived, Mr. One had already launched that palm attack. Although June Moxie tried his best to stop it, he was too far away, and the best time to stop it had already passed. So, he could only stop most of the Empress' power, and the remaining 20 to 30% of the pure Xianqi inevitably hit the Empress back. Although it was only 20 to 30% of the Empress' power, it was not easy to deal with the power of a great master. Even a powerhouse like Tian Xian might not be able to resist it. June Moxie was furious. He shouted, "Wen Sangyu, you're courting death." His voice was moving, and he dashed toward the Empress like a sharp arrow. Mr. Wen's attack was successful, and he wanted to retreat. June Moxie had already arrived here, and there was no room for him to act. Moreover, he had already launched a palm attack, and it had hit the target. His mission was completed. From now on, the sky was high and the sea was wide, and it had nothing to do with him anymore. However, he couldn't leave at this moment. June Mo. CS swooped over like a hawk. He hadn't even arrived, but his powerful aura had already made it hard for him to breathe. Mr. One was startled. He brandished his sword with all his strength, and a cold sword light shot out from it. It was aimed at June Mo. Mr. One retreated at the same time. He brandished his sword in a frenzy as he retreated. Two large trees on either side of the road were suddenly cut in half. Then, the huge trunks of the trees, which were covered in thick snow, rushed towards June Mo. The large amount of snow was like a natural barrier, blocking everyone's line of sight. As long as he could block June Moxie, Mr. One was confident that he could escape immediately. June Moxie snorted coldly and activated the power of wood to cover his whole body. Shwa! He passed through the crown of the first tree without any obstruction and didn't change his direction at all. He passed through the middle of the trunk and left a big round hole in it. June Moxie's body was already on the second tree. The trunk behind him exploded with a bang. The trunk in front of him was like a bamboo pole that had been smashed by a hammer and cracked into the shape of a trumpet flower. June Moxie's body had already passed through the trunk and appeared in front of Mr. One. Mr. One was startled. He hadn't expected that June Moxie's speed wouldn't be affected at all. However, he was still a supreme master, so he didn't panic even though he was startled. He shouted loudly and brandished his sword. However, June Moxie's figure had already pounced into his bosom by the time the sword light flashed. Then he felt a sharp pain in his arm, and his sword flew out of his hand with a clang sound. It turned into a streamer of light in the air and didn't know where it had gone. Then a bang sound was heard as a shoulder was chopped by June Moxie's palm. At the same time, a thunderous knee struck his lower abdomen, and then his lower abdomen. Suddenly, Mr. Wen felt a deluge of dizziness and vomited a mouthful of blood. He felt as if his internal organs were on fire, and his xian-qi was in a mess inside his body. His profound and pure xian-qi couldn't be used at this moment. In less than a tenth of a blink of an eye, Mr. Wen had gone from having the upper hand against the Empress to having fallen into a boundless hell. Then Jun Moxie suddenly disappeared in front of him, and the back of his neck tightened. He felt as if someone had grabbed him by the neck, and the wind whistled in his ears. Then a bang. Sound was heard, and Mr. Wen's body fell down from the air. Jun Moxie had appeared in front of Princess Raimu, because he had heard Princess Raimu's heart-wrenching and mournful cries. Jun Moxie's fingers touched the Empress' wrist, and a wisp of pure xian-qi seeped into her body. Both of Princess Ling Meng's knees had been shattered into pieces, and there was a large wound on the back of her head. All of these injuries were not light, and blood had covered her entire body. However, she didn't seem to feel the slightest bit of pain. She knelt on the ice-cold ground with her shattered knees and only knew how to hug her mother tightly. She looked at Jun Mo with a pair of pleading eyes and begged helplessly, "Jun, save my mother." Jun Moxie's heart sank as soon as he touched the Empress' hand. His face turned gloomy. He hadn't expected that the Empress' injuries would be so serious. Her internal organs had been ruptured, and her heart had been shattered. There was nothing he could do to save her. With Jun Moxie's control of the Hongjun Pagoda's limited power, he couldn't do anything about such serious injuries. The art of unlocking heaven's fortune had the ability to seize the fortune of heaven and earth, but it was still difficult to save such injuries. If Jun Moxie hadn't used his own xian-qi to extend the Empress' last bit of life force, the Empress would have perished. The great master stage experts seemed to be unable to withstand a single blow from Mei Shuiyan and Jun Moxie. But it was only because their opponents were too terrifying and they couldn't resist. In reality, they stood at the peak of the Xian continent. Although there were stronger existences above them, in a general sense, they were already the most terrifying existences. Even though Jun Mo had blocked most of the power of the Great Master's attack, the Empress, who was a weak woman with a cultivation of not even silver xian, would still not be able to withstand the remaining power of the attack. Jun Moxie sighed. Pure xian-qi surged into the Empress' meridians without any regard for the consequences. It wrapped around her broken internal organs, completely cutting off the connection with her other organs, and preserve her last breath. Although this method couldn't save her life, it could still support her last breath so that she wouldn't die on the spot. But this method was only a temporary solution. It couldn't last for long, and could only last for the time it takes to drink a cup of tea. Jun Mo hadn't considered the Jun family's purpose in doing this. He hadn't considered the Empress' purpose either. He had only thought of Yi Guhan, that infatuated man. Jun Moxie felt that he had the obligation to let them see each other one last time. No wonder Yi Guhan was so anxious, abnormal, and restless just now. It turned out to be because of this. Could it be that this was the so-called psychological connection between lovers? How much love does one have to have for such a psychological connection to appear? 18 years of longing, no regrets. 18 years of separation. This heart has not changed. Jun Moxie felt that he should not be completely indifferent to this infatuation. At this moment, his stubborn, evil nature broke out. He didn't care that the woman in front of him was the Empress. He only knew that Murong Xiao and Yi Guhan were a pair of lovers. If he could help, he would help. What identity, etiquette, and morality? Jun Moxie didn't consider it all. Not at all. After wrapping the Empress' internal organs with xian-qi, Jun Moxie looked up to the sky and roared, "Yi Guhan." He tried his best to control his voice. When it came out of his mouth, it was quite calm, so as not to shock Murong Xiao. After it spread out, it suddenly exploded in the night sky, rushing towards the Jun family's courtyard. Murong Xiao's dim eyes suddenly brightened after hearing Jun Moxie shout this name. Endless expectation and longing flashed in her eyes. At this moment, two long roars rose into the sky at the same time. Solitary Eagle and Feng Wanyun flew over at the same time and landed beside Jumoxi. Right now, the strength of these two people had already reached the level of a superior supreme. Seeing the situation in front of them, they were shocked. The ominous feeling in Yi Guhan's heart became stronger. At this moment, he also heard Jumoxi's roar. Almost without hesitation, Yi Guhan rushed out crazily. His long hair suddenly spread out and danced in the wind. It was full of desolation and desolation. From afar, he saw Jumoxi squatting on the ground. He seemed to be holding something in his arms. Yi Guhan's rapid breathing suddenly stopped. He only felt that there was a blockage in his chest. His mind was blank. He had obviously realized something. He no longer had any consciousness and only knew that he was running for his life. When he was in front of him, all of a sudden, everything in the world lost its color. In his eyes, there was only a face and a pair of eyes left. She had forced herself to lift her cheeks. Her eyes were still as gentle as before. But now, she no longer concealed her affection when she saw Yi Guhan. She looked at him tenderly and affectionately. Her eyes were filled with indescribable longing, reluctance, and endless guilt. Little Han. Murong Xiao tried her best to keep her voice from trembling. She looked at Yi Guhan without blinking. She was afraid that if she blinked, she would never see that familiar yet strange face again. Xiao. Yi Guhan's body swayed. His face suddenly turned pale. He took half a step forward weakly. Suddenly, his body turned soft, and he knelt down heavily. He put his cheek in front of Murong Xiao and looked at the face that he had missed for 18 years. Xiao, who is it? Who hurt you? You? Before he could finish his sentence, he suddenly felt a sweetness in his throat. A mouthful of blood came up, but he swallowed it. He was used to seeing death, so how could he not see that Murong Xiao was on the verge of death? Little Han, I finally see you again. It's so good. Murong Xiao looked longingly at Yi Guhan's face and softly said, Little Han, do you know, I've been thinking of you every day, every moment, all these years. Tears began to gather in her eyes, but she used all her strength to hold them back, for fear that once the tears flowed out, she would no longer be able to see her sweetheart's face. Yi Guhan knelt in a daze and looked at her with warm and gentle eyes. He felt that his heart was empty and said in a daze, Xiao, it doesn't hurt. I'm here. Murong Xiao smiled with satisfaction. Her eyes revealed a little girl's expression, and she said firmly, Yes, with you I don't feel pain, and I'm not afraid. This was what Yi Guhan had said to comfort Murong Xiao 20 years ago when they were in danger together. At that time, Murong Xiao was injured. At that time, Murong Xiao's reply was exactly the same, because even though it had been more than 20 years, their relationship had never changed, just like that day, Little Han. Murong Xiao wanted to raise her hand and touch his face, but she was powerless to do so. Yi Guhan carefully picked up her hand and placed it on his face, feeling the gentle touch. Finally, he could not help but burst into tears, soaking the warm jade hand. Little Han, don't cry. Murong Xiao tried to move her fingers, wanting to wipe away his tears, but found that more and more tears were flowing. Jumoxi, I know I'm going to die, but before I die, I want to tell you one thing. Murong Xiao still looked at Yi Guhan's face and said softly, Bloodsword Hall is in the 3 camps of the Imperial Guards. Jumoxi's body shook, and he said in a low voice, Thank you. His hand was still holding Murong Xiao's right hand at this moment. He was continuously injecting spiritual energy to support her in Yi Guhan's final farewell. Because the moment they separated, Murong Xiao would leave this world. Little Han, I'm going. You have to take care of Raimu for me. Murong Xiao revealed a sad smile, full of reluctance. Menger is a good child, but also a pitiful child. Yi Guhan's eyes were blurred with tears, but he did not make a sound. He bit his lips so hard that they bled. A stream of blood slowly flowed down, but he did not feel it. Murong Xiao Xiao seemed to understand something. She sighed softly and rolled her eyes with difficulty. June Moxie, please, for my sake, help me take care of Raimu. I entrust her to you. She clearly saw the complicated look in June Moxie's eyes and begged weakly. Even if you really don't want to marry her, please take care of her. Please, I beg you. Her eyes were filled with hope as she looked at June Mocie's face. Her eyes were filled with endless pleading and longing. This was a mother's last wish for her daughter before she died. It was also her last wish that she couldn't let go of. June Moxie took a deep breath, increased the output of spiritual energy, and nodded silently. He had already felt that Murong Xiao Xiao's breath was getting weaker and weaker, and the meridians in her body were almost completely still. Even the divine art of unlocking heaven's fortune was getting more and more difficult to travel through her meridians. Murong Xiao Xiao's lips curled into a grateful and relieved smile, and she said sincerely, Thank you. Then she turned her eyes and gently looked at Yi Guhan. Her eyes were filled with endless infatuation. She didn't say a word. She still had the strength to speak, but she didn't need to. She didn't want to speak either. She only looked at him. She wanted to firmly remember this face before she died. She wanted to carve it into her soul and become a brand. She wanted to carry this brand with her for all eternity. Yi Guhan didn't say anything. He let his tears flow down his cheeks as he looked at the beautiful woman in front of him. His gaze was firm and full of deep affection. The two of them looked at each other in a fixed manner. The gazes of the two pairs of eyes seemed to entangle each other's souls, never to be separated again. Suddenly, Murong Xiao Xiao's face flushed and her spirit was shaken. She suddenly used the last of her strength and murmured, looking forward, if we are not fated to meet in the next life. Suddenly, her body trembled and stopped. At this moment, her face was full of expectation, tenderness, and affection. Her eyes were still exuding endless affection and infatuation, but life had left her. The hand that was stroking Yi Guhan's face finally fell down powerlessly. Yi Guhan's tears flowed, but his expression suddenly became calm. In fact, it was frighteningly calm. His gaze was fixed on the gentle and beautiful face in front of him. Then, he slowly said the last line of the poem. I would rather betray the heavens than betray you. Xiao Xiao. He knelt and looked at Murong Xiao Xiao, who seemed to be in a deep sleep, and said calmly, June Moxie, there's a sword manual on the table beside my bed. I will leave it to you. Raimu, I will also leave it to you, please. June Moxie wanted to say something, but it was all stuck in his throat, and he could not speak for a while. Yi Guhan's complexion was unexpectedly calm as he smiled and said, I have one last request. Please bury the two of us together. On the tombstone, write tomb of Yi Guhan and Murong Xiao Xiao. She is not the empress. She has never been. Please grant my wish. June Moxie sighed deeply and said, I can promise you, but the person who killed her is here. Don't you want to avenge her with your own hands? And the mastermind who killed her is in the palace. Don't you want to avenge her with your own hands? Raimu is here. Don't you want to take care of her? Can you really rest assured? I trust you. With you taking care of Raimu, I will be at ease. Yi Guhan smiled with expectation and yearning. Looking at the dark night, the cold wind blew his long hair messily. He slowly said, The murderer, I will leave it to you. The road to the underworld is lonely. If I kill him now, Xiao Xiao will still be afraid when she sees him in the underworld. So, I will leave first to accompany her. As for Yang Huaiyu, he is not worthy for me to kill. He smiled slightly and said, Xiao Xiao is waiting for me. What is more important than our reunion in the world? Revenge is not worth it. If we miss our reunion in the next life, Xiao Xiao will be disappointed and sad. We have been separated for a lifetime. As he said this, he slowly leaned over and pressed his face against Murong Xiao Xiao's still warm face. He whispered affectionately, Xiao Xiao, don't hurt with me. You won't be lonely. His body suddenly trembled violently. Then he softly fell forward. His remaining hand tightly hugged Murong Xiao's body. Their cheeks were tightly pressed against each other, and there was no more sound. Yi Guhan used the remaining dark force to break his own heart meridian, and his breathing was cut off. The two hugged each other tightly. On their faces, there was the same expression: satisfaction, expectation, yearning, longing. It seemed that they had reunited in the underworld. It seemed that in the next life, they had made a promise. Mother, Uncle Yi, ah. Princess Ling Meng let out a heart-tearing and lung-splitting cry. She suddenly opened her cherry lips, and a mouthful of bright red blood spurted out from the corner of her mouth. Her eyes closed, and she fell unconscious. The pain in his body had reached its limit. His mother, who had doted on him the most, had passed away, and Uncle Yi, whom he had relied on the most, had also followed him to the ground a moment later. Two of her closest people had passed away one after another. Princess Raimu, who had been traumatized, could not bear such a series of violent blows. She finally fainted. 2 hours ago, he was still huddled together with his mother under the same lamp, talking about his own worries. Only 2 hours had passed, yet they were already separated forever. How could a delicate woman like her endure such a cruel fact? Jun Moxie sadly lowered his head. Since he saved Yi Guhan, he had been depressed. After knowing Yi Guhan for so long, he had never seen Yi Guhan smile. Today was the only time he smiled, but it was for the illusory afterlife. Looking at Yi Guhan and Murong Xiao snuggling up to each other, Jun Moxie's heart was suddenly filled with emotions. From his mother Dongfang Wenxin and his father's love, to witnessing Yi Guhan and Murong Xiao's undying love, he suddenly had a deep realization. What exactly is love? Suddenly, a song came to his mind, faintly echoing. Perhaps it was a marriage in his previous life. Perhaps it was fate in the next life. The fault lies in our meeting in this life. It would only add to the fruitless grudge when the affairs of the world pass away, when the sea turns into mulberry fields. Once again, I will repay this love. If you were to repay this love, perhaps it was a marriage in his previous life. Perhaps it was fate in the next life. The fault lies in our entanglement in this life, giving birth to more suffering without an end when the affairs of the world pass away, when the sea turns into mulberry fields. Once again, I will repay this love. Then I will repay this love. The poignant song and the helpless emotion seemed to flow quietly between heaven and earth. Chapter 645. Jun Moxie sighed softly, picked up the bodies of Yi Guhan and Murong Xiao, and gently put them aside. His movements were so careful and cautious, as if he was afraid to disturb the reunion of the two people in the underworld. After settling the bodies of the two people, he turned back to check on Princess Raima's injuries. He was surprised to find that Princess Raima's injuries were also so serious. The double blow of losing her loved ones and the pain of her illness caused the delicate girl to faint. Both of her knees were broken, which showed how much strength she had used to kneel down one after another without any regard for her life. In addition to the huge impact that came afterwards, his knees, which were already heavily injured, suffered another heavy injury. The skin on his knees was lacerated, and his bones were exposed. Even his veins were bulging, suffused with a terrifying blood red and purplish-green color. There was another big, bloody hole on his head, and the blood that flowed out had already congealed at this moment and was frozen together with the ground. However, the center of the wound was still continuously foaming with blood. This kind of injury was so serious. From a normal point of view, it was an incurable disease. Even if it could be cured, it would be a disability. Fortunately, Jun Moxie was here. Fortunately, Jun Moxie's power had improved greatly recently. Otherwise, he would really be helpless, and it would be difficult to fulfill his wish. Jun Moxie did not dare to be negligent. He reached out with his left hand and grabbed Princess Raimu's small hand. An extremely pure spiritual power poured into her body, slowly restoring her physical strength. At this moment, consolidating her corporeity was the key. Once Rimal lost a lot of blood, her life would be in danger. At that time, if he wanted to treat her again, it would take a lot of effort. His right hand was also idle. With a sweep in the air, Princess Raimu's long hair, which was stuck to the ground by blood, was all cut off. Then, he carried her by the waist. Jun Wui had also arrived at the scene at this time. In fact, Third Master had already been there for a while. He watched as Yi Gahan, his childhood playmate, committed suicide for love in front of his eyes, but he didn't say a word to stop him. 20 years ago, Jun Wui was one of the few people who witnessed Yi Gahan and Murong Xiuxiu falling in love. He witnessed their vows of undying love and their deep love. He also witnessed their separation, their helplessness, and their pain. Finally, he witnessed the two dying together for their love and reuniting after death. Jun Wui had expected his good friend to seek death, but he did not say anything because he knew that it was meaningless. Now that Murong Xiuxiu was dead, Yi Gahan had lost his life. How could he continue living? Or it could be said that Yi Gahan's heart had already died 18 years ago. However, Murong Xiuxiu was still alive. Yi Gahan didn't want Murong Xiuxiu to be lonely, so he insisted on living and accompanying her. Now that Murong Xiuxiu was dead, Yi Gahan finally had nothing to worry about. Death was his release. Real release. Only death could allow this affection of theirs to continue, and it would continue to exist between the heavens and the earth for eternity. In Yi Gahan's life, except for the little sweetness he experienced in his youth, he had never enjoyed any joy. Such a heavy and oppressive life. Now that his lover had passed away, he was finally free. So when he saw Yi Gahan commit suicide for love, although Jun Wui was sad and bitter, he didn't try to stop him. He even felt a sense of relief for Yi Gahan. This was a kind of relaxation that moved the heavens and the earth and made the people of the world cry at the same time. Yi Gahan, from now on, you're no longer lonely in the cold night, because you have her, you can have her forever, forever and ever, in heaven and earth. Guards! Jun Wui's voice was choked with sobs. His murderous eyes were filled with tears. Take good care of Brother Yi and Miss Murong's bodies. Order people to make a large coffin of good quality overnight and bury them together. Jun Moxie walked forward indifferently, holding Princess Raimu's body in his arms. He was thinking about how to arrange this poor woman in his arms. It was better for her to be unconscious now, but how would she face such a cruel reality when she woke up? Jun Wui followed him silently and asked in a low voice, "Emosia, what do you plan to do next?" Naturally, it will be done in accordance with Yi Gahan's request before he died. Jun Emosia replied in a callous manner, "I will give both of them a satisfactory burial place." His eyes emitted a sharp, cold light. What about the murderer? Jun Wui's eyes flashed with murderous intent. Tomorrow, set up a high platform in front of the palace and order the whole city of Tianxiang to gather and watch. Take the rebellious assassin, Wen Songyu, to the high platform. Tie him up with a fishing net and put him to death by 1,000 cuts. 9 days and 9 nights, a total of 999 cuts. If there is one less hour or one less cut, I will consider the executioner as his accomplice and bring disaster to the whole family. Isn't it not too much to sentence him to death by capital punishment for assassinating the Empress of Country? Jun Moxie said calmly, but his tone revealed an inexplicable hatred. The love between Yi Gahan and Murong Xiuxiu touched his indifferent heart. At this moment, he made such a crazy decision. He must fulfill the love between Yi Gahan and Murong Xiuxiu. Jun Emosia wanted to use a funeral that would shock the entire world to comfort the souls of the two in heaven. Even if it was shocking, world-shattering, or even long-lasting, he would not hesitate. I don't care about the general trend of the world or the common people. But as long as it is worth it, I will do it. The evil prince only acts according to his heart. He doesn't care about worldly etiquette. Yi Gahan, Murong Xiuxiu, I will fulfill your love. I will avenge you. I will make up for your regrets. I will fulfill your unfulfilled wishes. I never had a good impression of Igu Han, and I barely understood Murong Xiao Xiao. But what moved me was the affection between the two of you. Jun Wui gasped. In front of the palace? Tens of thousands of people watching? Entanglement and fishing nets? Death by 1,000 cuts. Such a crazy decision had left Jun Wui, the blood general, shocked to the point of shock. Yes, I'm already being lenient by not investigating the sect of the assassin. Jun Moxie raised his face. His face was angular and resolute. It's decided. Okay, but what about the mastermind? Jun Wui sighed. He knew it was useless to persuade him. After thinking for a long time, he finally asked this question carefully. Murong Xiao Xiao didn't say who really wanted her dead, but she didn't need to say it. In Tianxiang City, who could order when Song Yu around? There was only one answer. There was only one person. Him? He can't die. At least not now, even if he wants to die. Jun Moxie smiled slightly and said viciously, even if we don't count the debt between Yithgahan and Murong Xiao Xiao, there's still the hatred of our Jun family, the hatred of my father and second uncle, and the blood debt of my two brothers. If we let him die like this, it's too easy. Even if it's death by 1,000 cuts, 9,999 cuts, it's still too easy for him. I must let him live a life worse than death. Jun Wui sighed deeply. That night, after settling down Princess Raimu, Jun Moxie did not hesitate at all and immediately mobilized the troops. Jun Moxie, Jun Wui, Jun Zhantian, Solitary Eagle, Feng Wan Yun, Haichun Feng, Song Shang, Bailey Luo Yun, Lung Ao, the 300 Heaven Destroyers and Soul Devourers, and even Guanqing Han and Dongfeng, when Xian followed them and quietly left the Jun residence. Bloodsore Hall. Jun Wu Hui's death was directly related to the 3 battalions of the Imperial Guards. It could be said that they were the enemies of the Jun family, just like the Shao family. How could Dongfeng when Xian not be there to besiege the Bloodsword Hall? The hatred of killing her husband was absolutely irreconcilable. Dongfeng when Xian must see the enemies who killed her husband with her own eyes. No matter how bloody and cruel it was, she must see it. She must take revenge for her husband at all costs. This was the insistence of Dongfeng when Xian. The Jun family must be present for the great hatred of the Jun family. The souls of the heroes were not far away, and they could be comforted in the underworld. The first half of the night was still filled with the joy of the new year, but the second half of the night was the beginning of endless bloodshed, and it was also the first battle of the Jun family to collect the blood debt. Jun Moxie would not allow any fish to escape the net. Therefore, Jun Moxie gathered all the most elite forces of the Jun family. On the long street, the blood fog had yet to disperse, and the 3 battalions of the Imperial Guards had already appeared in Jun Moxie's vision. Looking at the heavily guarded battalions that were close to the palace, Jun Moxie smiled coldly. The next moment, Jun Moxie, Solitary Eagle, Feng Wan Yun, Haichun Feng, Jun Wui, Bailey Luo Yun, Lung Ao, Song Shang, and the rest all moved out together. Everyone silently dispersed into the night sky, almost without making any sound. The guards outside the 3 battalions were all silently dealt with in an instant. With the full strength of several Superior Supreme, and the weakest being Shun Xian strength, these ordinary soldiers did not have any room to maneuver at all. Jun Zhantian, on the other hand, was waiting at the same spot with a large group of people. The old man's eyes flashed with the joy of revenge and infinite sadness. After that earth-shattering incident, the old man's mentality had instantly changed sharply. Since the Bloodsore Hall had changed and collectively became the Imperial Guards, then everything was self-evident, and there was no need for any evidence. The Tianxiang Imperial family had no loyalty to the Jun family, so why should I still be loyal? This was a great absurdity. The fact that the Bloodsore Hall had changed into the Imperial Guards was a huge blow to the old man. Dongfeng when Xian and Guanqing Han, dressed in white, quietly looked at the dark tent in front of them. their eyes also full of coldness. June Moxie's white robe flashed in the dark night, and with a wave of his hand, the 300 members of the Heaven Destroyer and Spirit Devourer members were like a group of extremely agile leopards, silently scuttling out in the dark night. First, a few people occupied the original guard positions, and then 3 people formed a team, guarding the various entrances. The rest of the people swarmed in like a swarm of bees. Today's 2 shifts, tomorrow's 2 shifts, the matters at home will be settled. The day after tomorrow, the outbreak will begin. Today was a huge mistake. I woke up in the morning to write, and after typing 1,000 words, the computer suddenly broke down and the document could not be typed and could not be copied. Rebooting the machine was the same. So I hurriedly called a taxi and took the main unit to repair, but when I went to the computer repair shop, everything was normal, so I moved back, but when I got home, it was still the same. So I called the guy who repaired the computer and scolded him, then called a taxi, and when I got there, everything was still normal, so when I came back, it was still the same. I broke down. The guy who repaired the computer said, "Do you want me to go to your house to take a look?" So he came. After fiddling for a long time, he frowned and said, "Did a hacker hack you? I don't have a choice. You should find someone else." After he left, I continued to research and made a few phone calls to get the guys to come quickly. After the phone calls, I suddenly realized, why did the control key on the keyboard sink down and not pop up? So I used my fingernails to pick at it, and it popped up. Everything returned to normal in an instant. So that's what happened. I spent nearly 100 yuan just to call a taxi. Chapter 646. The solitary falcon neatly dealt with the members of the Bloodsword Hall in one of the tents. He had just come out and was about to rush into the second tent when he saw Jun Mo Sierra rushing out of the tent with his hands covered in blood. He had left a blood-red rainbow in the dark night. A fierce fight came from a tent not far away. At the same time, a voice roared, "Who are you? Do you know where this place is? How dare you be so presumptuous? Aren't you afraid of bringing disaster to your family?" Then came Jun Wui's cold voice. "What? You don't recognize me, Jun Wui? But I recognize you. Even if you turn into ashes, I won't mistake you for someone else." "Ah, Jun Wui, you..." A cry of surprise was heard. Jun Moxie's body made a strange turn in the air and slid in like a fish. He saw Jun Wui fighting with a red-faced man in a nightgown. There were 2 other people who were bareback and helping them. There were 3 other people who were already dead on the ground. Jun Wui's cultivation was already close to the supreme level. This red-faced man only had the cultivation of Tianxian at the peak. Under Jun Wui's fierce offensive, he retreated step by step. Jun Moxie felt something was wrong as soon as he came in. Because Jun Wui, who had always been calm and collected, had a face full of resentment at this moment. He had lost his cool. Otherwise, with Jun Wui's current strength, he could have taken down his opponent long ago. Jun Moxie thought of something. He flew and dropped his hands. With a flick of his index finger, a sword and a saber flew out from the left and right. They were already stuck in the 2 people's necks. With a bang, the 2 people fainted at the same time. Looking at the red-faced man and the resentment on Jun Wui's face, Jun Moxie seemed to understand something. He asked, "Third uncle, this guy was one of the people who entered your army back then, right?" Jun Wui sent out 2 palm strikes and said through gritted teeth, "Not bad. Back then, it was this fellow who held the military order and led the Shao clan into the main camp, causing the 100,000-strong army to be useless. This person was the culprit. I will never forget his face." Jun Moxie smiled coldly and said, "Since that's the case, don't let him die a quick death." Jun Wui sneered, "Of course I won't let him die so easily." The red-faced man's face was filled with despair as he roared loudly like a madman. He wholeheartedly fought with his life on the line, hoping that he would be lucky enough to perish together with his opponent. However, with the arrival of Jun Moxie, Jun Wui no longer had to worry about the red-faced man escaping. He could use his own strength. The red-faced man's skills were inferior to his opponent's, and he was instantly restrained. He could not even barely defend himself. Jun Wui sneered cruelly. Suddenly, He gritted his teeth and charged forward. With a bang, the two of them collided. The red-faced man roared and spat out a mouthful of blood. Both his wrists were dislocated at the same time with a crack, and he lost all his combat power. However, Junwoo, he wasn't willing to let him off. So, he spun around and kicked him in the chest. Then, he kicked him to the ground. Then, he stepped heavily on his throat. The red-faced man screamed miserably. His legs kicked, and he fainted. Junmo Xie shouted, and two big men broke through the tent. They held ropes made of beef tendons in their hands and tied the three men up in a practiced manner. They were like rice dumplings. We need to interrogate them later. Jun Wooey snorted and said angrily, there must be a conspiracy. Third uncle, what else do we need to interrogate? Conspiracy? What conspiracy? Jun Mo Xie laughed mischievously. Then he said in a deep and ruthless voice, what is this place? How did these people come here? Why did the Bloodsword Hall become the Royal Guards? It's already clear. What else do we need to interrogate? Since Grandpa has acquiesced and even participated in our action, it means that he has abandoned his loyalty and agreed with our way of doing things. These people should be directly executed together with Wen Sangyu. Jun Wui's eyes lit up and he said ruthlessly, that's right. At this moment, there were shouts of killing outside, and flames were soaring into the sky. The neighboring military camps blew their horns one after another. They gathered noisily and prepared to come to the rescue. When Jun Moxie and his nephew stepped out of the tent, the battle here was already coming to an end. 100 members of the Heaven Destroyer and Spirit Devourer team were waiting with Shin Beast tendon crossbows in their hands. Once someone escaped, they would immediately become a hedgehog. Solitary Eagle, Feng Wanyun, and the other top experts stayed in front of the tent in the center, watching with their hands behind their back. Hai Chen Feng, Bailey Luo Yun, and the rest were still fighting inside. It was obvious that this was the place where the leaders of the Bloodsword Hall were. The tent was especially large and gorgeous. How's the situation? Jun Moxie walked over and asked. It's basically settled. This is the only place left. Let Hai Chun Feng and the rest train a little. Their progress is undoubtedly fast, but their state of mind may not be able to keep up. Solitary Eagle's eyes sparkled as he watched the fierce battle inside. He said, this kind of frightening but not dangerous opportunity is rare. Jun Moxie nodded his head in agreement. With Solitary Eagle and Feng Wanyun, two superior spirit masters, watching over the formation, it was guaranteed that nothing would go wrong. Under such circumstances, it was undoubtedly a good thing to let these brats train with real swords and spears and gain some combat experience. The people inside aren't weak. Jun Mo Xie chuckled as he coldly watched the fight going on in the room. Suddenly, two small figures caught his attention. In the midst of the intense battle, two small, short, and thin figures nimbly shuttled back and forth. Suddenly, the two of them burst out at the same time, both of their remaining arms holding a dagger that shone brilliantly in all directions. The timing was perfect, a fatal blow, a fatal blow. Hai Chen Feng was using his own sword to force the Sky Xian expert in front of him into a flustered state. However, two thin silhouettes had pounced on him from two different angles. One of them was using their left hand, while the other was using their right hand. Then they thrust their short swords into the left and right ribs of the Sky Xian expert like a hot knife through butter. Then they let go of the daggers and somersaulted out of the way. The dying Sky Xian expert roared in despair. He completely ignored Hai Chan Feng's attack and used the entirety of his Xian strength to attack with his left and right palms in the hope that he would be able to take one of them down with him. However, the two youngsters were very perceptive and wouldn't be greedy for the moment of success. So, they retreated far away. The Sky Xian expert's mouth foamed with blood. He swayed twice and finally collapsed. With a swoosh, the two little ones rushed forward at the same time and pulled out the daggers from the expert's body. Holding the daggers in their hands, they nimbly turned around and continued to look for their next target. Although they were just two little kids, Their grasp of the situation was so accurate, and their attacks were so ruthless that it made one gasp in amazement. Even after killing, the two little ones' faces had an inexplicable look of fanaticism, without the slightest bit of fear. Feng Wan Yun sighed. Langling looked at the two little bodies and said sincerely, "These two little fellows are natural-born executioners. In time, as long as they can grow up, I believe they will be two unparalleled assassins not inferior to Chu Chiyuan. It's not bad that they are already executioners, but it's a pity that they were not born this way." Jun Mo Xie said indifferently. If you knew what they had experienced in the past, you wouldn't be the least bit surprised by their current behavior. After experiencing the inhumane torture in Huanghua Hall, Tian, Kan, and D.K. no longer had a shred of pity in their hearts. As long as they were determined to be enemies, they should be killed. Orderly footsteps sounded, and the loud sound of hooves could be heard from all directions. The reinforcement from the other camps had finally arrived. 3 burly men were like 3 iron towers, blocking the path. Their faces were cold and expressionless as they looked at the troops charging at them, not retreating at all. "Who's in front? Get out of the way. Otherwise, we'll kill without mercy." One of the leaders couldn't help but ask when he saw that the 3 of them were so calm and did not seem to care about his army at all. "The Jun family is here to settle the matter. Unrelated people, please leave. Those who dare to disturb will be killed without mercy." One of the burly men stepped forward and replied with Langlang. This was already the border of the palace, but in the words of this Heaven Destroyer member, the royal army was actually unrelated people. Kill without mercy? The Jun family? The commander shuddered as he looked at the source of the firelight in bewilderment. Suddenly, a whistling sound cut through the air, and a white silhouette slowly rose from the flames. It stepped onto the top of the flagpole outside the tent, and a tall and slender silhouette stood there, as steady as a mountain, and loudly announced, "Jun Moxie of the Jun family is here to exterminate the rebels. Unrelated people, get out of the way." The last 5 words he shouted were like rolling thunder that resounded through the entire Tianxiang city. That kind of reckless and arrogant attitude was not concealed at all. The troops coming from all directions suddenly stopped. Almost at the same time, all of them reined in their horses. For a moment, the sound of horses neighing could be heard. Then a steady voice said, "So it's Jun Sunshao here. This old man has been disrespectful. May I ask, what is the 3rd young master doing here?" The one who spoke was the commander of the imperial bodyguards, Murong Hao of the Murong family. Jun Moxie snorted and said in a deep voice, "Do I have to report to you when I'm doing something? If you don't leave, then you'll have to stay as well." Murong Hao's expression changed. He was about to speak, but suddenly an old man in black clothes appeared in front of his horse like a ghost. He looked at him with eagle-like eyes and spat out a single word from Langling's mouth. "Get out." As he spoke, he drew a line with the tip of his foot, and his figure flashed. In an instant, he drew a 3 feet deep trench on the ground. He stood where he was and coldly said, "Anyone who dares to cross this line will die." Murong Hao took a deep breath. This was the edge of the imperial palace, and the ground was paved with the best quality granite. The texture was unique, but this old man in black had casually created such a trench with the tip of his foot. Furthermore, there was absolutely no Xian Qi emitting from his body. Could it be? He carefully looked at the old man. His black clothes were like iron, his face was thin, and his eyes were like an eagle's. Suddenly, he remembered a legendary figure. According to the rumors, wasn't this King of Man in the Jun family? Could it be that this was the King of Man, the grassland eagle god, solitary eagle? He could not help but tremble. At this moment, Jun Zhantian's deep voice was heard. "Murong Hao, lead your men and retreat." Murong Hao's body trembled, and he said, "Yes, old marshal." He then waved his hand, "Retreat." The men under his command immediately retreated in unison. Solitary Eagle scoffed, and his face showed that he was not happy. "What a bastard! How dare he look at me so closely when I went out today there were two girls reading a novel at the computer repair shop. I saw that they were actually reading the original version. How rare. Then, both of them cursed at the same time. This phone Ling Tian is too lazy. He only reads 4 chapters a day. This is intolerable. I quickly escaped with my face covered in dirt. Ugh, let me explain. Today, when I saw a friend in the book review section asking me about ventriloquism, he said that it was extremely unreasonable. I felt that I had to answer. I really don't know ventriloquism. I don't even know June Moxie's art of unlocking heaven's fortune, the lone body, and sword unification. I'm ashamed. Chapter 647. In the Imperial Palace, the wine glass in the Emperor's hand fell to the ground with a paw sound. His whole body suddenly trembled like a sieve. After a long while, he calmed down. A sinister look flashed between his eyebrows as he muttered, June Mo, Xia, you've finally found the Blood Sword Hall. Are you finally coming? I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of you. I'm the Emperor. I'm the Emperor, the #1 person in Tianxiang. He roared, grabbed the wine pot, and gulped down another mouthful. Suddenly, he stopped and muttered, the Empress should know about the Blood Sword Hall. Does that mean she's not dead? Did she tell June Moxie? At this point, his eyes suddenly lit up. He kicked over the table in a frenzy and roared, why aren't you dead? Murong Xiao, why aren't you dead? Why aren't you dead? He roared like this for a while, then suddenly shrank his entire body back into the wide dragon throne. His fingers trembled as he held his head. Suddenly, he said in a low voice, as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders, thank goodness you didn't die. You didn't die. That's great. Xiao, do you know I can't bear to let you die. I really can't bear to let you die. You're not dead. That's great. This kind of extremely complicated and abnormal feeling was not something that others could understand. Perhaps even the Emperor of Tianxiang, who was in pain, could not understand his own state of mind. What exactly was he longing for? The hustle and bustle of the New Year's Eve finally passed. The Emperor waited anxiously, but no one came to settle the score with him. The sky was already bright, but still no one came. Why didn't the June family come to find me? Since you found the Blood Sword Hall, why didn't you come to find me? Why? This question puzzled His Majesty, and it worried him deeply. He was already prepared to face death and was ready to meet his final destination. But the other party did not come. This strange feeling was really hard to describe. Your Majesty, a guard came to report, but it startled the Emperor, who was lost in thought. He trembled and jumped up from his chair. He said angrily, what's the matter? What happened? As the words left his mouth, he realized that his back was drenched in cold sweat. It turned out that he could still be afraid. The June family has erected a platform at the entrance of the Imperial Palace. There's a banner on it that says, punish the rebels, warn the evil, and eradicate the traitors. But I don't know what they're doing. The guard was startled and hastily reported. What? The Emperor was startled. His face suddenly became gloomy as he roared in a low voice. The June family. This is too much. That high platform is really high. From the high platform in the palace, you can see it clearly. The guard carefully knelt down and reminded him in a low voice. I'll go take a look. The bustling construction scene completely blocked the main entrance of the palace. June Mo Xia was dressed in a white robe with a light blue belt around his waist. He was sitting cross-legged on a huge armchair. His black hair was fluttering freely in the cold wind. He had an evil smile on his face. He was talking and laughing with Dugu Xiao beside him as if there was no one else present. Not far away, there were 3 corpses, fresh blood still dripping down. These were the guards at the entrance of the palace. They came to stop the construction when the platform was first erected, but were immediately ordered to be killed by June Moxie. Then, the June family's guards stood on the left and right. The members of the Heaven Destroyer and Spirit Devourer team surrounded the palace guards with a terrifying, murderous aura. The Emperor stepped onto a high platform and looked up. The opposite platform was right in front of him. It was so eye-catching. He understood that the reason why Jun Moxie wanted to erect a high platform in front of the palace was to humiliate him, to attack him with all his might. But now, he could do nothing in the face of such humiliation. He had to bear it even if he didn't want to. If he were to really fly into a rage and launch an attack, the only result would be to hasten the destruction of the Tianxiang Empire. The Jun family was no longer the Jun family of the past. Any random person would be able to kill like a madman in the dark of the night. They would be able to come and go as they pleased. And as for killing, they would be able to take the head of the emperor without a sound. Looking at the high platform that was almost within reach, the emperor's body turned cold. His chest was filled with anger, but there was nothing he could do. For the first time, he felt some regret. If Jun Moxie wanted to take revenge openly, perhaps he wouldn't be so afraid. Even if it was torture, it would only result in death. As an ambitious person, he was not afraid of death. But this kind of blunt knife, cutting flesh, this kind of naked humiliation in front of the whole world was unbearable to him. Right now, the emperor felt like he was the biggest laughingstock nailed to the pillar of shame. He was being ridiculed by the whole world. He looked at the white figure sitting leisurely on a wooden armchair. His eyes were spitting flames of anger. If this angry look could really burn someone to death, then Jun Daxiao would have died at least 100 times. At this moment, Jun Moxie seemed to turn his head indifferently. His eyes met the gaze of the emperor of Tianxiang, Yang Huaiyu. The emperor felt a stinging pain in his eyes. Jun Moxie's gaze was like two sharp swords, accurately stabbing into his heart. In that instant, it was difficult for him to breathe. Even standing was difficult. The corners of Jun Moxie's mouth curled into a playful smile as he suddenly said, "Xiao Yi, look over there. It's our emperor." "Ha, that yellow robe of his really makes him look like a black bear." As he said that, he pointed with his finger. It was the middle finger. Dugu Xiao Yi also looked over and said, "Not at all, not at all. Where's the black bear?" "Oh, isn't that it? A big black bear." Jun Moxie pointed with his finger again. Dugu Xiao Yi wasn't the only one who was looking at him. Everyone around them also turned their gazes to look at him. "Ha ha ha!" Jun Moxie laughed loudly. He suddenly stretched out his left hand and pulled Dugu Xiao Yi's slender waist into his embrace. He said in a low voice, "Do you see that?" Dugu Xiao Yi felt weak all over as she was suddenly embraced by him. She leaned against him weakly and said shyly, "You're so bold. There are so many people here." Although she said that, the little girl did not struggle. She did not even have the slightest intention of resisting. She could not wait to let the whole world see her happiness. "This is the first time this enemy has hugged me." Dugu Xiao Yi blushed and thought to herself, "Ha ha, awesome. Holding the power of life and death in my hands, holding a beauty's waist with a smile, ruling the world, sweeping across the universe, shocking the world with a flip of my hand. Gods and ghosts cry with a glance. What more can I ask for in life?" Ha ha ha. Jun Moxie laughed maniacally, his voice reverberating in all directions. That laughter was like a sharp steel needle, piercing into His Majesty's ears, piercing into his heart. What nobility, what glory, splendor, and wealth. How can they be in my eyes, Jun Moxie's eyes? Jun Moxie laughed. His left sleeve rolled up like a flowing cloud. A glass of wine beside him jumped up. He caught it in his hand and suddenly brought it forward. He laughed from afar and said, "Your Majesty, it's rare that you have the leisure to climb up high to look at me. Let me give you a toast from afar." "Ha ha!" Young Master Jun's voice was wild and unrestrained, carrying with it an unyielding arrogance that didn't conform to the heavens and earth, spreading far and wide. Everyone was startled. They looked in the direction of his voice and saw a bright yellow figure disappearing behind the curtains. Jun Moxie's wild laughter didn't stop. He drained the wine in his cup in one gulp. With a flick of his wrist, the wine cup flew out like a shooting star. With a pa sound, it smashed into pieces at the window where His Majesty had just appeared. It was a great humiliation. In the imperial palace, His Majesty's face was ashen. He flicked his sleeves and went downstairs. His whole body was trembling with anger. His eyes were bloodshot. Madness, despair, and humiliation alternated in his eyes. He panted heavily. His breathing became more and more hurried. Suddenly, he choked and coughed violently. Blood trickled down from the corner of his mouth. Jun Moxie had caused such a ruckus. If the imperial family couldn't get rid of Jun Moxie in the shortest time possible, then his dignity as the emperor of Tianxiang would be gone. But how could he get rid of Jun Moxie? Just think about it. Who in the world is capable of accomplishing that? Why did Mr. Wen withdraw? Why did the great golden city make such a decision? The emperor couldn't think of any other reason if he didn't have misgivings about Jun Moxie and the Jun family. Even the three holy lands couldn't do anything about Jun Moxie. So, what could a mere emperor of this world do? But he couldn't vent his anger. His chest was about to explode. The bystanders didn't know the truth. So, they couldn't help but be stunned when they saw this scene. This Master Jun Sunshao is so lawless. Isn't this no different from rebellion? Not only did he build a high platform in front of the imperial palace, but he also humiliated his majesty. Isn't this too unimaginable? There's a lot of noise and footsteps. All the aristocratic families in the capital had arrived. But, seeing this scene, even an idiot could understand that the Jun family was clearly going against the royal family. After showing their heads from afar, they disappeared without a trace. This muddy water is too deep. Let's stay away from it. It was the first day of the Lunar New Year. The weather was great. The sun gradually rose, and under this clear sky, this cruel show of a death by 1,000 cuts finally began. As the naked and tied people were taken to the high platform and tied to the wooden stakes, the voices of the bystanders became louder and louder. One by one, they were taken to the high platform. A total of 118 people were taken to the high platform. Wen Songyu was the last one. Jun Zhantian and Jun Wui, together with the Jun family, finally made their appearance. Everyone's face was filled with excitement and joy. The great hatred that had been buried for 10 years was finally going to be avenged today. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Jun Moxie floated up to the high platform and waved his hand. Suddenly, a big flag appeared on the high platform. It was blood red and over 100 feet high. There were 7 big words written on it. General in white, Jun Wuhu Wei. The 7 big golden words shone brightly under the sun, as if they were emitting thousands of rays of light. It was like the glory of the name itself, illuminating the world. The crowd below seemed to realize something and couldn't help but be in an uproar. The flag of the general in white had not been seen for 10 years. Why did it suddenly appear here at this time? Jun Mo Xie's expression was solemn as he bowed towards the flag. The Jun family members in the audience also bowed in salute. Jun Zhantian's eyes were filled with tears as he gazed at his son's flag for a long time. His lips trembled as his white hair danced in the wind. He stared at it in a daze, as if he could never get enough of it. This was his eldest son, and also his greatest pride. He was the pride of Tianxiang and all the soldiers in the world. Today, he could finally pay his respects to his son with a justifiable reason, with the blood of his enemies as a sacrifice. The wind whimpered in the sky. The flag fluttered in the wind, just like the general in white's army, sweeping through the world. General in white. General in white. Suddenly, a tsunami-like voice rang out. All the soldiers present shouted at the same time, screaming at the top of their lungs. Facing the flag of Tianxiang's protector, someone suddenly cried out and slowly knelt down. Everyone responded one after another, and in an instant, a dense mass of people knelt down. Everyone had tears in their eyes as they sincerely thanked this general in white for the glory and stability he had brought. This flag is the flag of my father, General in white, Jun Wuhu Wei. Jun Mo Xie stood up with a stern look in his eyes. Back then, my late father fought for Tianxiang and made great contributions. Unfortunately, he passed away in his middle age, becoming the greatest regret of the world. But only now do I know that my father didn't die in battle, but was murdered. Murdered? How would the ordinary people know about this secret? They only knew that the general in white, who had never been defeated in 100 battles, had died in defeat. But who would have thought that it was a conspiracy? Who in the world framed June Mosia? Suddenly, a towering man stood up from the crowd. His face was full of grief and indignation, and his veins were bulging as he shouted angrily. This man's face was weathered, and he was tall and strong. He stood up straight, and his face was full of fighting spirit. One look, and anyone could tell that he used to be a soldier. Who murdered General June? Everyone roared at the same time. It's this group of people. June Moxie turned around and pointed at the 118 people behind him. He gritted his teeth and said, "It's this group of bastards who are worse than pigs and dogs. They are heartless and plotted against me. My father was a hero, but he was plotted against by these villains. This hatred is absolutely irreconcilable. Kill them. Kill them. Cut them into pieces. We can't let them off so easily. This group of bastards, they are worse than pigs and dogs. Cut them into pieces. Cut them into pieces. My father was bathed in blood for the sake of Tian Xiang, for the sake of the people. But he was plotted against by these despicable villains. If I don't take revenge for this, I'll be ashamed to be a son." June Moxie roared. "Today, with everyone here as witnesses, we will use the blood of our enemies to offer sacrifices to my father and the heroic spirits of the soldiers. Offering sacrifices to the heroic spirits. Offering sacrifices to the heroic spirits." Countless people burst into tears, especially the soldiers who had followed Jun Wu Hui to war. They gritted their teeth so hard that they could hear their teeth chattering. It was only now that they found out that their beloved General June had been murdered. Begin the execution. June Moxie's eyes turned cold, and he waved his right hand. A black net was thrown out, and everyone on the stage was covered with it. Then it tightened and slowly twisted. Little by little, the prisoners' muscles bulged out of the small holes in the net. Even those who had no common sense or knowledge knew what kind of punishment was being carried out on the stage. Death by 1,000 cuts. It was the cruelest and most inhumane way to execute a prisoner. Everyone's breathing became rapid. The executioners stretched out their hands and pulled out the cloth that was stuffed in the mouths of the prisoners. These people's dantians had all been crippled by June Mosia. Their xianqi that they had painstakingly cultivated for many years was long gone. But unexpectedly, not a single one of the 100 or so people begged for mercy. Although some of them were so scared that their faces were pale and their bodies were trembling, but no one begged for mercy. These people were assassins and were used to seeing life and death. Seeing this scene today, they knew that begging for mercy was useless. They would be stabbed if they stretched out their heads, and they would be stabbed if they shrank their heads. So they might as well endure it kill. The people below the stage were shouting wildly. June Mosia raised his right hand and fiercely made a chopping gesture. 118 steel knives were raised at the same time. "Wait, June Moxie, I have something to say." Wen Songyu suddenly raised his head. The strong humiliation of being naked made this supreme master's face distorted. "June Moxie, I have always followed the rules in my life. I have never done anything harmful to others. This is the only mistake I have made in my life, and I was entrusted by someone. Can't you just give me a quick death? Even if you've been a saint your entire life, you've committed a crime on the last matter, so you're still a sinner." June Mosia looked at him coldly. "This has nothing to do with good or evil. No matter what, I am a supreme master of the supreme golden city. I don't want you to be merciful. Can't I ask for a decent death? June Moxie, why do you have to be so cruel? Don't leave a way out for us in the future." When Songyu was so angry that he asked sadly, "You finally took out your life-saving talisman? You are going to use the supreme golden city to scare me. You should know that the supreme golden city can't scare me." June Moxie smiled coldly. He flicked his finger, and a black light flew out and smashed into Wen Songyu's mouth. After a series of clanking sounds, Wen Songyu spat out blood and more than a dozen teeth with the blood, It turned out that this old man wanted to take the opportunity to kill himself by biting his tongue. But June Moxie found out in time and stopped him. June Moxie's white robe fluttered. He walked a few steps forward and came to the front of the 110 people. He said lightly, "If you still want to kill yourself by biting your tongue, go ahead. But I want to tell you, if you obediently let me cut you into pieces, everything will be over from now on. If you try to kill yourself by biting your tongue, no matter whether you succeed or not, I will kill all your parents, wives, children, and relatives in your family. Not a single blade of grass will be left, and not even chickens and dogs can escape. Your names and information are in my hands. Don't doubt me, because I can definitely do it. By the way, if anyone doubts me, you could try it with your relatives and your family. I don't mind. Everything will be settled today. All the guests have been gathered by me today. It's all over. I have also greeted all the relatives yesterday and today. Starting from tonight, everything is finally over. Very tired, but finally relaxed. I am very relaxed. So, I will start tomorrow. Of course, it is not continuous, but starting from tomorrow, I will start working hard this month. 5 days have passed this month. I hope it is not too late." Chapter 648. June Moxie smiled faintly, revealing his snow-white teeth. In the eyes of these people, it was so cruel, like a beast baring its fangs before it hunts its prey. Upon hearing this, several people showed a look of despair on their faces at the same time. They were thinking about this in their hearts. They were prepared to bite their tongues and commit suicide after a period of time. They didn't expect this young man to be so ruthless. With just one sentence, he forced them to not even commit suicide. They could only endure the pain. Since there was no chance of getting lucky today, should they still implicate their families? June Moxie had grasped the psychology of these people. They couldn't live, and they couldn't die. In the underworld, some debts had to be repaid. Naturally, they had to be repaid thoroughly. June Moxie sneered and said, "Yesterday's various causes, today's retribution. What are you waiting for? Execute." As soon as his voice fell, the butcher's knives fell in the hands of a group of executioners. Today's executioners seemed to be fiercer than in the past. Their work was more careful and neat. Jun Dashao's reputation as a bear tyrant was now well known. He slaughtered living people with a glare, and he slaughtered several people at once. Today, he slaughtered over 100 people in one go, and all of them were executed by 1,000 cuts. How could they not be careful and neat? If they accidentally let their prisoners suffer a few cuts, their entire family would have to be buried with them. Therefore, the group of executioners naturally had to be as meticulous as possible. This also caused many of the people who were being tortured to have zero crimes. As the knives fell, the flesh split open and blood spurted. A series of earth-shattering screams rang out continuously. Below the stage, some people screamed in fear, their faces pale. Ordinary people were shocked to hear such heart-wrenching screams. Fear was a reasonable thing. However, there was another group of people, all of them standing ramrod straight, watching everything that was happening on the stage with great pleasure, afraid to miss even half a glance. This group of people were dressed in ordinary civilian clothes, but all of them were tall and had weathered faces. They gathered together spontaneously, slowly forming the largest group of onlookers, watching the fluttering flag on the stage in an orderly manner. Their eyes were filled with excitement, eagerness, and nostalgia. These people were Jun Wu Hui's former subordinates. After Jun Wu Hui's death, many who knew the inside story felt disheartened and left the army. But today, on this big day, they gathered together spontaneously, still in the same formation as when they were in the army, quietly standing below the stage. In everyone's heart, there was a joy of revenge. Death by 1,000 cuts. The scene had officially begun. On the stage, the eyes of the 108 people who were being tortured were fixed on Jun Moxie. They were well aware that there was no chance for them to escape. But all of them had the same thought in their minds. Remember this kid. Even if there was no chance of survival, everyone had the same thought. Remember this brat. So, You must take revenge, even if you have to live for generations to come. So, Jun Moxie stood with his hands behind his back, looking at the bloody scene in front of him. He said gently, I know that what all of you want to do now is to kill me and take revenge. Even if you don't have the chance in this life, in your next life, in your next life, in every life, you will find me for revenge. So, you must open your eyes wide and look, and remember this face of mine. If there really is a next life, you can find me for revenge. I welcome you at any time, and even reincarnate a few more times, it doesn't matter. He sneered and said, but look at you guys, just look at how you guys screamed after being stabbed. You're not a big deal. Even if you become a ghost, you're just a coward and a good-for-nothing. Drink milk and work hard in your next life. I don't like you guys in this life, but I hope you'll be more successful in your next life. Ha ha. A guy raised his head ferociously, blood and sweat dripping down his face, his muscles twisted, and he shouted, Get stabbed? You say it so easily. Come up and try it. No, you guys should enjoy this super treatment. I'm not in the mood for it. Jun Moxie snorted. Jun Moxie, if there really is a next life, I'll kill your whole family. Just wait and see. One Song Yu raised his head in pain and stared at the young man in front of him with endless hatred. Although Wen Song Yu was over 80 years old, he had always been clean and had profound skills, so his physical fitness was excellent. Jun Moxie was afraid that he might not be able to endure the 9 days of torture because of his age, so he didn't destroy his exquisite Xian Qi, but only broke his Dantian and destroyed his foundation, so that all his Xian Qi could stay in his body and nourish his body, but there was no room for him to use it. Wen Song Yu's naked body was as strong as a teenager. As a great master, he lived a comfortable life, but now he was humiliated in the eyes of the world, and he couldn't die immediately. Naturally, the resentment in his heart reached the extreme. Wen Song Yu, I'm a little scared by your words, but I'm very curious. If there's a next life, will you be a pig or a dog? Jun Moxie said sarcastically, If you do something wrong and have to pay the price, you should be brave enough to bear the consequences. Why do you have to gnash your teeth and talk about the next life? It will only make me laugh at you. Wen Song Yu was silent, but his bloodshot eyes were still staring straight at Jun Moxie. Brother Wen, why are you? In the palace, the emperor trembled and suddenly felt powerless. Xiao. At this moment, he suddenly understood. Why did Wen Song Yu appear here and be sentenced to death without saying anything? The empress hadn't returned yet. It seemed that she had been killed by Mr. Wen. And because of this, Wen Song Yu angered Jun Moxie, so he was punished by 1,000 cuts. He was dead after all. Are you really dead? Yang Huayu slowly lowered his head, curled up his whole body, and held his shoulders tightly with his hands. He felt extremely lonely and helpless, like a wild beast with nowhere to warm itself in a cold winter night. With 2 rustling sounds, a few drops of tears fell on his sleeves, and then fell to the ground in the distance. Heavy footsteps came. Jun Moxie looked up and saw Tang Yuan getting off the sedan chair and coming all the way with Sun Xiaomei and a group of guards. When they approached, Tang Yuan raised his head and looked at the military flag fluttering in the air. He bowed deeply and respectfully. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, but Tang Yuan had lost a lot of weight. Compared to before he lost weight, he could be said to be very slim. Now, he was at most around 300 pounds. It seemed that he had rebounded after losing weight, but it had been stopped. Although the base number of fatties was too large, and he was still much fatter than ordinary people, he still looked more like a human now. Jun Moxie felt relieved, but at the same time, a peculiar feeling welled up in his heart. He didn't let anyone inform Tang Yuan on this occasion. Although Tang Yuan would definitely know, Jun Moxie believed that Tang Yuan should be able to understand what he meant. The Tang family had always been loyal to the royal family of Tianxiang. They were even the loyal supporters of the emperor of Tianxiang, Yang Huayu. Old Master Tang Wanli and the emperor had a life-and-death friendship. Therefore, Jun Moxie didn't think that Tang Yuan would come. Once this fatty appeared here, it meant that he would be under great pressure, just like the other aristocratic families in the capital. Although they knew that something big had happened here, they still withdrew as soon as possible. They didn't even dare to watch the show. It was because of this. Perhaps the royal family didn't dare to provoke June Moxie or the June family because they couldn't do anything to them. However, they still had an absolute advantage against the other aristocratic families. Therefore, the aristocratic families chose to remain silent. They would wait for the curtain to fall and see the reaction before making a decision. Although adding flowers to embroidery was not as good as sending charcoal in the snow, the danger of the former was far less than the latter. June Moxie was well aware of this point, and he understood it even more clearly. Therefore, he didn't think that Tang Yuan would appear. He didn't want his brother to be in a difficult position. Fatty would definitely be in a more difficult position than the aristocratic families. On one side was his family, and on the other side was his best brother. It was really a dilemma whether to come or not. But Tang Yuan still came. Not only did he come, he even brought his fiancée with him. He made a grand entrance in broad daylight. This appearance was tantamount to showing his position. The bow to the regretless army flag also showed that there was no turning back for Tang Yuan. He used his actions to show his ultimate position. He didn't even talk to June Moxie beforehand. This was the most valuable thing. June Moxie felt very gratified in his heart. He had been hanging out with this fatty ever since he crossed over to this world. At first, he treated him as an ordinary fair-weather friend. But step by step, he found that although this fatty was a villain, he had a true temperament. He slowly accepted Fatty's friendship. Fatty could be said to be Hitman June's only friend in both of his lives. But June Moxie had never imagined that in such a dangerous situation where his entire family would be annihilated, it would be this cowardly and laughable fatty who had become the only one who dared to stand out and openly support him. Was a good brother. Actions always speak louder than words. June Moxie floated down from the platform and arrived in front of Tang Yuan. "Fatty, what are you doing here?" Tang Yuan smiled mischievously. His plump face revealed a wretched smile. "Do you still need to ask? You and I are equally famous debauches. Since you're here, how can I not come? You know my temperament. I've always liked to watch a good show. Ha ha ha. This is the death of 1,000 cuts. I might not get to see such a big scene a second time in my life. Wouldn't it be a pity if I didn't come? Wouldn't it be a treasure?" June Moxie smiled from the bottom of his heart. He patted Tang Yuan's shoulder heavily. Then, he looked at Tang Yuan's fat face in a serious manner. Then, he looked at Sun Xiaomei and said in a heavy tone, "Good brother." June Dashao didn't say anything else. Tang Yuan's plump face was full of a silly smile. His eyes showed a trace of satisfaction and emotion. Sun Xiaomei calmly looked at everything in front of her. She didn't say anything. She just held on to Tang Yuan's hand tightly. This was because this exceptionally intelligent woman knew that even though the June family had the absolute upper hand in the current situation, she would never be able to return to the Sun and Tang families if she were to follow Tang Yuan out of the city. After all, that was their roots. Good brother. Chapter 649. Brothers. This was an exceptionally warm word. What was a brother? Going through mountains of blades together, going through seas of fire together, bearing pressure together, not necessarily sharing blessings with you, but if there were misfortunes, we would bear them together. Brothers never need to say anything, they only need to do it. The sound of a horse's hooves could be heard as a horse galloped towards them. As it approached, the rider's hair and beard were all white, and his stature was tall and sturdy. It was the head of the Tang family, Tang Wanli. Old Master Tang jumped down from his horse and landed in front of Tang Yuan. His face was full of anger as he panted with rage. "You evil creature! You don't know what's important and what's not. Come back with me." Tang Yuan shrunk his head and said, "Grandpa, please wait for a moment. I will return to the aristocratic hall after I finish paying my respects to Uncle June." "You bastard! You dare to bargain with your grandpa!" Old Master Tang was so angry that his beard flew up high. His face was ashen as he raised his hand. "Grandpa, I can't go back with you, at least not now." Tang Yuan was somewhat afraid of his grandpa, even though he had seen many things in recent years. But he still raised his head and argued, "Grandpa, you can risk your life for His Majesty. You can disregard your family in your life. You can do anything at any time because His Majesty has shown you kindness. Moreover, you have gone through life and death together with Him. This is a friendship between men, and I understand that. But you can do anything for His Majesty, and I can do the same for the third young master. Grandpa, you have your friendship, and we have our perseverance, and we have our perseverance." Although the volume of Tang Yuan's voice was small, his tone was getting more and more resolute. Just like how you still insist on being loyal to the imperial family. Even after so many years, your original intention has not changed. Your grandson certainly admires your moral integrity, but do you wish for your grandson to be a despicable villain? Alas, old Master Tang suddenly looked at his grandson in a daze. He raised his hand, but couldn't bring it down. After a long while, the old man let out a long sigh and said dejectedly, "But how would you know the pros and cons of this? Just now, third young master called me a good brother." Tang Yuan's face lit up. "I have brothers, blood brothers, but I've never had a brother like this. This is the first and perhaps the last. Ever since I was young, no one has ever treated me as a friend, and no one has ever treated me, Tang Yuan, as a brother. Third young master is the only one, whether it was before or now. I've always recognized him as my brother." Tang Yuan said in a low voice, "I am willing to have such a brother for the rest of my life." He looked at old Master Tang and said in a low voice, "Just like how you treated your comrades who risked their lives for you." Tang Wanli stood there in a daze. He suddenly felt that this grandson in front of him was very strange. He had always thought that this grandson of his was already a waste, a glutton, a lazy person, and a good-for-nothing. Even if the former's value had increased 100 times because of the aristocratic hall, he had always thought that he was just a puppet of Jun Moxie. But at this moment, he felt that this grandson had really grown up. He had his own ideas and could be called a real man. But the position he was standing in was the opposite of his own. Tang Wanli's face darkened as he heaved a long sigh. With some difficulty, he turned around and mounted his horse. He said in a low voice, "Yuan, you've finally grown up. You have your own choices. In short, you're on your own now, and the Tang family." He didn't finish his sentence. His expression was very complicated. He seemed to be very gratified, but at the same time, he seemed to be very distressed. It was as if he had something to say, but in the end, he couldn't say it. Finally, he only let out a long sigh and squeezed his legs. Tears streamed down Tang Yuan's face. Looking at his grandfather's back and his white hair, he bit his lips and said in his heart, "I'm sorry, grandfather, but I think I'm not wrong." "Brother Wanli." Jun Zhan Tian strode over and called out loudly as he looked at Tang Wanli's back. Tang Wanli stopped his horse but didn't turn around. He said in a deep voice, "Jun Zhan Tian, you've avenged your son today. You've vented all your grievances and your heart is free. But you, other than in front of the palace, is there no other place for you to set up this high platform? Other than feeling free, do you not have any other thoughts? Don't you feel a little uncomfortable?" Jun Zhan Tian stood there solemnly and slowly shook his head. "Brother Tang, you are not me. There are some things that you won't understand. I know that your heart is not comfortable, but I also don't want this to happen. Black and white, right and wrong, there must be an explanation. How can these grievances be resolved? If you were me, what would you do? Yes, I don't understand. I don't think I will ever understand, but I am very uncomfortable and very angry." Tang Wanli's voice was cold as he said in a low voice, "I believe that I am not the only one who feels uncomfortable. My old brothers who were lucky enough to survive that year will also feel uncomfortable. Those old brothers who died on the battlefield, if they're still alive, they will feel even more uncomfortable. Because what you are humiliating is what we fought for thousands of times. Tianxiang is ours. We exchanged our blood and flesh for it. It is the blood of countless people who died on the battlefield." Jun Zhan Tian, ask Zhu 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 if he is comfortable. Ask Morong Fengyun if he is comfortable. Ask yourself if you are comfortable. As for the explanation, after today's battle, even though I'm not as clear as you about the inside story, I still understand a lot. So, I did not bring my troops here today. Maybe someone has wronged you, but Tianxiang belongs to all of us. It was won by our countless brothers. Tang Wanli Lingling said, I only know this. I don't know anything else. I'm not interested in knowing. Jun Zhan Tian sighed. That's right. Based on what you said, Tianxiang belongs to all of you. I do not deny this, nor do I have the right to deny it. Jun Moxie smiled and stood up. Old Master Tang, but you seem to have missed out on a few people. I believe that without these people, Tianxiang would not be Tianxiang anymore. Tianxiang does not belong to all of you. It belongs to my father Jun Wu Hui, my second uncle Jun Wu Ming, my third uncle Jun Wu Yi, my eldest brother Jun Mo Yu, my second brother Jun Mo Cho, and the tens of thousands of soldiers who died in Tian Guanling. Today's scene may not be comfortable for all of you, but I believe that they will be comfortable for all of you. Jun Mo Xie chuckled and said sharply, If you really want to, I can reveal the truth to the world and let the people of the world judge who is right and wrong. Do you think that your old friends will be even more uncomfortable? They might not understand it as well as you do. Tang Wanli was speechless for a moment. Although he had become a civil servant, he was still a soldier and had experienced countless battles. How could he not understand the thinking of a soldier? As long as one had participated in the war, whether alive or dead, they would stand on the side of the Jun family. Moreover, if this matter were to be made public, then the Tianxiang imperial family would truly go down in infamy for 10,000 years. The sacrifice of a soldier must not be slandered by a villain. No matter if this villain was the emperor or a commoner, there must be an explanation for murdering such a pillar of the army. Otherwise, the world would not be convinced. Jun Moxie smiled and said, You don't have to panic, I will not do that because I disdain to do so. But my surname is Jun, and I am part of the Jun family, so Jun Moxie will not care if you're comfortable or not. I only want them to be comfortable. I feel comfortable too. He said word by word, Let my father, second uncle, and 2 brothers feel comfortable. Let the innocent 100,000 soldiers who sacrificed their lives feel comfortable. Let the souls of those wronged heroes feel comfortable. So, everyone had their own standpoints. In the face of hatred, there was no reasoning. Not to mention that you can't argue with me. Even if you can really talk your way out of this and make me speechless, it would still be meaningless. The debt of that year must be repaid by someone. His hawk-like gaze was as sharp as a sword. Ling said word by word, It doesn't matter who this person is. It doesn't matter how high his position is. What he owes must be repaid. Tang Wanli was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he whipped the horse's buttocks and the horse galloped away. Only a long sigh was left, drifting in the wind. On the high platform, the cruelest punishment was still in progress. Grandpa Jun's face was a little ugly as he looked in the direction Tang Wanli left, deep in thought. There is nothing to think about. Everyone has their own standpoint. Grandpa, we are here to collect debts, not to rebel. We did not destroy Tianxiang. Besides, I have never been interested in rebelling. Are you interested? I believe that our Jun family is already disdainful of such splendor and wealth. Jun Moxie smiled. Glory is glory, debt is debt. These are 2 different things. As for us, we do not need to consider the feelings of others. Justice is in the hearts of the people. If old Master Tang thinks that he can argue with me, he will not leave. Grandpa Jun sighed. He shook his head and said, Forget it. Perhaps it will be uncomfortable, but Wu Hui, Wu Ming, Mo Yu, and Mo Cho must be avenged. He turned around and said, I will return to the mansion first. You take charge here. He paused and suddenly smiled bitterly. Ridiculous. Since ancient times, how could there be an immortal country? How could there be a ruler of 10,000 years? It was all hard work, all proud, but all turned into dust, turned into nothingness. Why bother? He mounted his horse and left. The first day, although it caused an uproar in Tianxiang City, there was no accident. The incessant screams shook the world and the entire palace. The imperial concubines, maids, eunuchs, and guards were all pale and trembling. They were panicking to the extreme, afraid that someone would suddenly break into the palace with a knife and a sword. But on the second day, the death by dismemberment continued, but there were many more unknown people watching. The expressions of these people varied, but it was obvious that they were all very interested in one Sangyu on the stage. A supreme being expert of a generation was actually suffering the punishment of death by 1,000 cuts without any resistance. This was rather surprising. Jun Moxie had been paying attention to the movements in the palace. Early the next morning, the heads of the aristocratic families and the courtiers were summoned to the palace and had yet to come out. Jun Moxie was not anxious at all. He looked on coldly. No matter what decision they made, he would accept it. Justice is in the hearts of the people. Chapter 650. From his second day onwards, Dongfang when Xin and the rest had all arrived. Even Dugu Xiaoi, who had always been attached to Jun Moxie, was waiting at home. After all, such a bloody scene was not something that they could handle. Or perhaps it was difficult for the world to be peaceful. Suddenly, a terrifying aura was emitted from the crowd. This shocking aura was mixed with surging anger. Jun Moxie instantly sensed it. He squinted his eyes and looked up. 2 rays of cold light shot out from his squinted eyes. In the crowd, 2 figures were particularly eye-catching. No matter where they went, it was as if a large ship was sailing across the surface of the water, leaving a path for them to pass. The person in front was tall and handsome. He looked to be in his 30s or 40s, but at the same time, he looked to be in his 50s or 60s. It was impossible to tell his actual age. His face was thin and his eyes were cold. He wore a crown on his head and was wearing a hemp robe. He was walking towards Jun Moxie step by step. As for the person behind him, Jun Moxie recognized him. Supreme Golden City's 3 Pearls Throne, Xiao Weicheng. The position of the person in front seemed to be even higher than Xiao Weicheng's in Supreme Golden City. There was still a distance of 20 to 30 feet between them, but Jun Moxie could already feel an oppressive chill. Behind Jun Moxie, Solitary Eagle and Feng Wanyun both revealed a shocked expression. This person's strength had obviously completely exceeded their expectations. Jun Moxie leaned against the armchair. His expression and posture did not change at all. He looked at the 2 people walking towards him, but his eyes became more and more gloomy. "You are Jun Moxie?" The person was expressionless. He looked at Jun Moxie as if he was looking at air and asked in an indifferent tone. Such a posture was like a god talking to a mortal. It was full of condescension and condescension. It was as if he was saying, "I'm giving you face by talking to you. Oh, don't you know I'm Jun Moxie? Then you can guess who I am." Jun Moxie rolled his eyes and looked at this person mockingly. "Brat, you have a sharp tongue." The man shouted in a desolate voice. A majestic aura that was as heavy as a mountain suddenly pressed down. This powerful aura only targeted Jun Moxie. Even the Solitary Eagle and Feng Wanyun behind him were not affected. This kind of precise grasp, the pinnacle of control, really reached the level of a breathtaking level. It was a pity that Jun Moxie was still lying lazily on the armchair with a faint smile on his face. He didn't unleash his aura to counterattack. Instead, he just casually leaned against the chair as if he didn't notice anything. An imposing aura attack? That really scared me to death. With the Hongjun Pagoda, this young master is least afraid of aura attacks. No matter how strong your aura is, can it be stronger than the Hongjun Pagoda? Go and embarrass yourself. That person only felt his enormous, imposing aura that was as vast and majestic as a mountain pressing down heavily. Yet it was as if he had been pressed into the ocean. Yet it was also as if he had been pressed into the air, and there was not the slightest place for him to exert any force. His surefire suppression method was actually ineffective. This kind of feeling was extremely unbearable. With a wave of his sleeves, the imposing aura disappeared instantly. That person's cold face was still expressionless, but there was a trace of surprise in his eyes. Not bad indeed. As expected of someone that Venerable May has taken a liking to. You're really impressive. June Moxie slowly raised his eyelids and asked indifferently, Who are you? His voice and expression were even more indifferent and arrogant than the hemp-robed man's expression. If the hemp-robed man's expression was that of God, then June Moxie's was that of the Jade Emperor. Arrogant enough. I'm Duju. Duju looked at June Moxie's eyes with his sharp eyes and said word by word, I'm the heartless Venerable. He didn't turn around. He raised one hand and pointed at the stage. He said indifferently, Wen Songyu is my man. He was waiting for June Moxie to reveal a shocked expression on his face. The heartless Venerable, Duju. This was a legendary name that could change the world when it was announced in the past. Although he had been away from the mortal world for almost 200 years, and many people might not know the glory of this name, he believed that June Moxie must know. Because June Moxie had a mysterious master and a confidant who was also a venerable. So you're Duju. June Moxie's lips twitched slightly. No wonder King Master Shao didn't even dare to breathe loudly behind you. The heartless Venerable is really impressive, but I don't know why you've come here and come to me. What do you want? Tell me what you really want. Let Wen Songyu go. Duju clasped his hands behind his back, his eyes cold as he spoke in a commanding tone. Even if the people of Gold City are in the wrong, it is not up to you to punish them. They are not people you can humiliate. Let him go now. For the sake of your master, I can let bygones be bygones, and let bygones be bygones. Let bygones be bygones? How magnanimous! For the sake of my master? June Moxie smiled weirdly. Do you know who my master is? How can you let me go because of him? It turned out that his face was actually so big. It's such an honor for a venerable like you to give him face. Duju's face darkened. He looked at June Moxie and didn't say anything else. At the same time, an extremely solemn and oppressive atmosphere formed in the air. It was so heavy that everyone present felt suffocated. Solitary Eagle straightened his body and took a step forward. His beard and hair fluttered behind him. Facing the heartless Venerable, Solitary Eagle didn't retreat or show any fear. Instead, he stepped forward. On the other side, although Feng Wanyan did not move, his white robes fluttered despite the lack of wind. His fair hand also slowly landed on the hilt of his sword. His 5 fingers, dry and strong, firmly gripped the hilt of the sword. His eyes were as sharp as swords. A hint of disdain appeared on Duju's face. He just stood there silently without any movement. He didn't even raise his eyebrows. However, he was like a volcano that was about to erupt, emitting a terrifying aura that shook the heavens and earth. Such a terrifying aura was visible to the naked eye. Even ordinary people, if they paid close attention, would notice that there seemed to be a distorted space in this area. It was a mysterious and subtle feeling. Solitary Eagle and Feng Wanyan didn't move, but beads of sweat appeared on their foreheads. The two of them didn't think that this heartless Venerable's cultivation had actually reached such a level. He didn't move, but he could use his own aura to mobilize the power of heaven and earth and use it to suppress them. Such a huge power was not something they could withstand. How could they fight against the heavens? This was no longer a simple aura. Instead, it was something that Duju had comprehended many years ago. He was able to use his own body's vital qi to form a temporary resonance with a mysterious energy between the heavens and earth. With a single thought, he could control this energy to attack. This had always been Duju's trump card. Facing June Moxie, he didn't need to use such an extreme method. However, Duju knew that he wasn't dealing with just June Moxie. Although June Moxie wasn't weak, he wasn't worthy of Duju's attention. This power of his was actually for one person to see, June Moxie's master. Duju wanted to tell this master, if I want to kill your disciple and destroy the June family, it's a piece of cake. However, I came here personally and even showed mercy to your disciple because of your existence. Regardless of whether the other party appreciated it or not, he had at least expressed his standpoint. Usually, at this point, both parties would take a step back. Duju would bring his disciple away, and the June family would forget about it. I've given you enough face, so you have to give me some face too, right? This was Du Ju's plan. Du Ju was very afraid of the legendary master of the June family. Although he was heartless, he wasn't stupid. The 90 masters from the 3 holy lands dared to try and kill Venerable Mei, let alone Du Ju. However, such a terrifying combination of forces would be completely defeated by the other party's aura. Du Ju knew that he wasn't a match for him. Therefore, although he was overbearing now, only an expert of his level would know that Du Ju was expressing goodwill. In this way, without leaving any trace, he could get things done without worrying about losing face. It was the best of both worlds. A strange look flashed across Jun Mo's eyes. It was as if he was surprised, but also something else. Following that, his face turned serious. He had been leaning against the chair all this while, but now he finally moved. He raised his head slightly, revealing a look of shock and surprise as he looked at Du Ju in front of him. However, there was still a look of him gritting his teeth and holding on. Although it seemed like he was trying his best to hide it, a careful person would be able to see it at a glance. Du Ju snorted coldly and stood with his hands behind his back. He asked, "How does it feel? Does it feel good?" Jun Moxie seemed to be in a lot of pain. One could faintly see the blood vessels and pulse under his skin trembling slightly. It seemed like he couldn't bear the burden, but he could still hold on. He forced an indifferent expression and said in an indifferent tone, "It feels good. It really feels good. No, it feels too good. Too good." Du Ju snorted softly and smiled coldly. "Is that so? Then I'll let you feel even better." After saying that, he once again increased the power of his aura. However, he was feeling strange in his heart. Why hasn't the master come out yet? Du Ju had a million reasons to believe that the peerless master was in Tianxiang City. He was in the Jun family's residence. Otherwise, how could the Jun family dare to deal with the people of the great golden city in public? What a joke. Could it be that I haven't oppressed Jun Moxie enough? This level of power isn't enough to lure him out? Is he that confident in his disciple? Jun Moxie groaned in a low voice. His head seemed to be suppressed by his aura. One could clearly see the blue veins on the back of his neck bulging. Chapter 651. Does it feel good now? Du Ju asked indifferently, with a hint of mockery. He had already used 30% of his strength, which was already quite impressive. Even a supreme being expert might not be able to withstand it. Although Jun Moxie's strength was not ordinary, it was only around the level of a supreme being. This kind of strength was believed to be enough. But the reality was just that unexpected. Of course, it feels good. If he could use a little more strength, it would feel even better. Jun Moxie gritted his teeth, sweat dripping down his face, as if it was very difficult for him to say each word. Very good. As expected, your bones are tough enough. Since you've already spoken, then this seat will naturally let you feel good to the end. Du Ju took a deep breath and suddenly raised his strength to the 5th level. Only a small portion was used to deal with Solitary Eagle and Feng Wan Yun, while the majority of his strength was placed on Jun Moxie. Jun Moxie's feet made a crack sound, but his body seemed to straighten up again, as if he was stubborn to the point of not turning back until he hit the wall, and not shedding tears until he saw the coffin. Du Ju frowned slightly and said, "Are you still going to persist?" Du Ju did not dare to go too far. If he really killed this youth in front of him, the consequences would not be a joke. Jun Moxie lowered his head slightly and said as if he was gritting his teeth, "Don't. Old thing, this young master has experienced this kind of situation many times. With this weak pressure of yours, you actually think you're so great? This young master has not had enough fun yet. Why? Old thing, do you have no more strength?" A strange scarlet light flashed in Du Ju's eyes, and his body that had been standing straight suddenly moved slightly. Actually, it was just his head leaning forward a little. But the pressure actually multiplied in an instant. His body was like a towering mountain towering in the clouds, unmoving. But that kind of vast pressure that connected the heavens was enough to subdue even the heroes of the world. But in reality, Duju was also a little depressed, and he was even in a dilemma. Although it was said to be friendly, this kid in front of him was too resistant. He had already used 60% of his strength, yet he was still able to withstand it. If he rashly added more, it would exceed the scope of his control, and unpredictable consequences might occur at any time. If it wasn't handled properly, then the consequences wouldn't be showing goodwill, but a demonstration. It was even to the extent that if he killed this kid on the spot, he would form an irreconcilable enmity and make an unparalleled enemy. But if he were to stop now, this brat's face would be full of dissatisfaction and would not appreciate his kindness at all. His old undying master also did not come out. In the eyes of outsiders, wouldn't it mean that he had lost a move? If that were to happen, he would really lose his head and face, wouldn't he? The heartless venerable become a laughing stock in front of everyone. He could clearly feel that this kid was barely hanging on. So why couldn't he admit defeat even now? Could it be that his master often used this method to train him? Yes, that's right. Jun Moxie let out another muffled groan. But he opened his mouth and laughed bitterly, saying, "It feels so good. Continue, continue." Duju was furious. For hundreds of years, how many people had dared to provoke him like this? This little bastard who was still wet behind the ears was challenging his limits again and again. A green light flashed in his eyes, and his eyeballs suddenly turned into a faint silvery white color, flashing and disappearing. At the same time, the pressure in the air was like a small hill that had just fallen down, and then another small hill smashed into that small hill. Boom! A soundless rumble sounded. The surrounding people were shocked to see that above Jun Moxie's head, there was a space of a few hundred feet that had suddenly turned into a pitch-black hole, a black that was darker than ink. It was daytime. Not only was the sun shining brightly, but the snow was also reflected clearly. But if one looked at the top of Jun Moxie's head, it was even more obvious that it was nighttime. 80% of his strength. The heartless venerable Duju had 80% of his strength. Even if Mei Shuyan was here, she would also have to be careful when dealing with him. As Jun Moxie felt this pressure, he suddenly felt an indescribable sense of ecstasy. That's right, ecstasy. When Duju had just mobilized this heaven and earth spiritual energy pressure, Jun Moxie had already felt something strange. As Duju's pressure approached his body, Jun Moxie first felt a heavy pressure. Then he felt the Hongjun pagoda in his mind suddenly open, spinning at high speed. But this time, it did not release a huge amount of spiritual energy like before. Instead, a large amount of spiritual energy suddenly separated from Duju's pressure, turning into a dense white fog, and was instantly swallowed by the Hongjun pagoda. And this time, the spiritual energy was unusually thick and pure. Moreover, it was mixed with a slightly majestic atmosphere. Jun Moxie quickly understood what this atmosphere was. This was the heaven and earth chi. At the same time, Jun Moxie felt that after the Hongjun pagoda refined this portion of energy, when it entered his body, his spiritual energy grew at a rate that was actually 10 times faster than before. What the hell was going on? But as for what exactly is going on, although Jun Moxie was not clear, he was not willing to delve into it at this time. Right now, Jun Emosia was like a dried-up pond, while Duju was making use of his own abilities like a no. It was like hundreds of high-powered water pumps, drawing water from other places and forcefully pouring it into Jun Moxie's meridians. Where else could he find such a good thing? It was truly a great feeling, a great feeling. So when Jun Moxie said to Duju that he was very happy, he was definitely speaking from the bottom of his heart. So, Jun Moxie would not waste such an opportunity. In fact, he was shouting in his heart, "Come again. Don't stop. The more the better. I don't mind even if you continue until the end of time. Damn it, if you continue to squeeze me like this, I will soon break through the 5th level of the art of creation." So, Jun Moxie immediately acted as if he was about to collapse, but at the same time, he was not going to collapse. This gave Duju an illusion. This kid is going to collapse soon. Just a little more strength, and he will be finished. But he had already increased his strength several times. and Jun Moxie was still in this half-dead state. Duju finally became angry, so he increased his strength step by step. This phenomenon, Jun Moxie did not know what was going on, and Duju was naturally even more confused, but in the end, it was because of one word: spiritual qi. The Hongjun Pagoda was extremely sensitive to spiritual qi. Once it encountered a place with an abundance of spiritual qi, it would open and absorb it. But in this densely populated Tianxiang city, the Hongjun Pagoda did not bother to absorb the spiritual qi here. Unless it was the pure heaven and earth qi that Jun Moxie absorbed during his cultivation, the Hongjun Pagoda was not interested in anything else. But this time, it was different for Duju. His cultivation was too high. He could actually mobilize a large amount of heaven and earth qi for his own use. He could directly compress the power of the heaven and earth, and then press it down to become his own attack. This kind of brilliant method, even if it was against a venerable expert of the same level, it would still be able to make the other party look miserable. This was similar to Mei Shuiyin's world cage. How could the power of the heaven and earth be ordinary? But this kind of supreme weapon that could be used to deal with others had fallen into Jun Moxie's hands today and had become his greatest tonic, because this kind of power was simply great news for the Hongjun Pagoda. To think that there was actually such a person who had painstakingly gathered the heaven and earth qi and forcefully poured it into the Hongjun Pagoda, and it was the kind that he could not do without. So, everything was very dramatic. And what made Jun Dashao even more pleasantly surprised was that under this kind of compression, Duju had to first mobilize his own mental strength to communicate with the heaven and earth qi, then he could further mobilize the heaven and earth qi to attack. But what the Hongjun Pagoda lacked was the heaven and earth qi. There was no shortage of spiritual qi, but the heaven and earth qi was a vast amount of qi. With Jun Moxie's current strength, he could not absorb much, and he often needed the Hongjun Pagoda to compensate him. But now, this heartless venerable had used the supreme Xian technique that he had bitterly cultivated for hundreds of years and put on the demeanor of a peerless expert. He stood with his hands behind his back, proudly facing the wind, and used a posture that best reflected the demeanor of an expert. His expression did not change, and in a short period of time, he had actually directly replenished a lot of the heaven and earth qi. He had almost made up for all the previous losses and even exceeded them by a little. Such a wonderful thing was naturally unknown to Jun Moxie. But this did not affect Jun Dashao's original intention of silently making a fortune. Under Jun Dashao's superb acting, sometimes he gritted his teeth, hissed, and gasped for breath, his face ashen and his lips pale. Sometimes his bones would crack, and his face would sweat profusely. His feet were stepping on the bluestone ground, and 2 pieces of bluestone had already broken, and the ones at the sides were also showing signs of cracking. Even Duju was worried for him. If he exerted a little more strength, would he crush this kid into meat paste on the spot? But he could clearly feel that if he exerted a little more strength, this kid would be convinced and wouldn't be able to hold on anymore. One more point, one more point, one more point, one more point. Just like that, the 2 of them were in a deadlock. If Duju knew that the strongest attack that he was so proud of had become the opponent's tonic, and that the opponent was gritting his teeth and enjoying it, as if he was enjoying a massage, this heartless venerable would definitely scream in embarrassment, and then spit out a mouthful of blood and die. And he would die with everlasting regret. For hundreds of years, when had the heartless venerable ever been played like this? It was not that he wanted to do good, but Jun Moxie's body was really too strange. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.